Hello, I'm Jimmy Snow. I'm the executive producer and founder of The Line. And the reason why I'm bringing that up is not just self-aggrandizing. It is because it is important to me that you understand the decision that I have made and I'm about to present to you is my decision. And if you're mad about it, the person to be mad at is me, because I'm not going to tell you who at the channel agreed with it and who, if anybody at the channel, disagreed with it. You're not going to ever find that out unless, I suppose, they try to attack me or expose me, but I trust my friends here. I like the people I work with. I try not to set hard rules usually, certainly not on the hosts, and then even there are rules obviously for the audience in the live chat calls and stuff, but we try to be as flexible as we can. However, this will not be a time that we are going to meet at all with flexibility. I woke up 3 hours after the event happened last night, and the event I'm referring to is an attempted assassination on Donald Trump at a political rally that is going to follow or be followed by, in a few months, an election. Because at the moment, the democratic process, while very flawed, and I'm not stoked with the two sides we have, is still ongoing, and voting is still an option. And as such, we are not going to platform any type of "this violence was justified" or any sentiments of conspiratorial thinking. And I cannot tell you how disappointed I am that over the last, right now it's about 8 hours. By the time you see this, it will be more. Actually, it's more like 10, I think. How disappointed I am in so many people who I understood to be a part of the skeptic community and the secular humanist community show that their values on those are malleable when it comes to somebody they dislike. Shows that when a conspiracy would be more convenient to adhere to, they will do so early on. This isn't to say that anything is impossible. However, adherence to, or even just the spreading of, hey guys, doesn't this seem staged? When it is so raw and there's so little information, this is an incredibly disappointing thing that I got to witness from, again, people I consider friends and people I consider colleagues. I'm not going to deep dive in the overall thing. I'm actually going to do that over on my own channel, and your favorite line host might be doing that too. And what they do on their channel will be totally their business, obviously within reason. If somebody who worked here suddenly was like, yeah, now I do support Trump, Project 2025, I assure you we would fire them, but those people don't exist. They don't work here anyway. Unequivocally, the position of the channel will be my position. The position of the channel, the line, the only thing that will be platformed, and this is, again, the only time I have said to hosts, basically, this is the only thing. If you are going to speak on this, it must be within these parameters. Otherwise, do not do it on this channel. And I'm not even asking everybody individually whether they agree with the sentiment or not. So some hosts may choose to not speak at all. Some hosts might decide to speak about it. But I would expect that for the most part, they are going to understand that these conversations are going to happen elsewhere, because the position will be absolutely only platformed from here: condemnation of the attempted assassination and a dismissal of conspiratorial thinking, a discouragement of people to try and create conspiracies out of this before we have any adequate information to suspect such a thing. And right now, that's where we are at. Again, I can't express enough how disappointed I am to see an atheist and skeptic community act a whole heck of a lot like the Mormons I was raised with, and other, I was also raised with conservative and in a right-wing movement, and I've seen this before, and holy crap, I thought we were better. Very disappointing. This is the other rule. So this is the actual rule that's important. I'm letting you know about the consistency on our side, that's all you're going to see from here, and as such, until we know what YouTube's limitations would be on having conversations, including conversations with people who who do not agree with condemnation of it, who do want to entertain the conspiracies, until we know what the fallout would be, if any, if we were to platform conversations like that, even with us taking the opposing side, we are not going to be taking calls like that. If that is your plan to call about, don't, even if you are on our side. In fact, screeners, producers, and hosts will all have been informed that the expectation is, if somebody even brings it up, at most they will get one warning of, we are not talking about that. This was hard explained at the beginning of the show. If you miss that, we can continue on. But if you even mention it again, the call ends. But for the most part, if a person brings it up, we may just end the call there, especially if it seems like they would have awareness that that isn't what we are talking about. That is going to be the instructions given to all the people involved, because I am not going to risk the importance of this channel on what some rogue asshole. I think we're, yes, good. We've been on long enough. I can just say asshole. Probably. No, even just talking about this means that this episode's demonetized, but I'm not going to worry about, I'm not going to risk the channel of somebody coming on and wanting to make the case. And then they go, look, your channel published somebody speaking about why it would have been a good thing. Until we have a clear understanding of what YouTube will allow us to discuss and debate regarding this topic, we're not putting the channel at risk, because the channel means a whole lot more than just this one topic. So again, in summary, the rules are no calls about this. Live chat will not be allowed to talk about it. Your messages will be deleted and you may be timed out for a day. Live chat will not be able to, and within reason, the comment section won't either. Our comment section is not heavily moderated. In fact, I'd call it rarely moderated. So it may be the case that we just put in some keywords and then skim through. But no, if you hear that and you try to bypass it and I see it, I may just block you from the channel from ever commenting ever again. So don't try and test it. That's it for me. Again, if you disagree, I don't care. Sorry, be mad at me, but this is the way it has to be. And now on to the show, which will be devoid of those live calls. The hosts are welcome to give whatever notes they want to, but we are not taking calls on that. Goodbye.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Sunday show. Here we are, July 14th, 2024. I'm at Dillahunty. Joining me, Dr. Darren Adair. How are you, Aaron?
I'm not bad here. Doing all right in warm, sunny Boston.
Awesome. Awesome possum. So let me just start off with the super monstrous elephant in the room. Jimmy just gave his announcement. I'm going to ask the moderators and anybody else and anybody who's decent and responsible in chat, if somebody's in chat causing any problems, just tell them to rewind to the beginning and watch this. There may come a time in the future, there probably will come a time in the future, where we can all talk about this in much greater detail and everything else. But today, we will not be taking calls on the shooting yesterday. And here's my only comment on the subject. A 20-year-old grabbed a gun and attempted to assassinate the former president and presumptive nominee just days before the Republican National Convention. It doesn't matter if he was a Republican, a Democrat, an independent, he was wrong. It doesn't matter if he was a gun nut, an incel, mentally ill, or an assassin for hire, he was wrong. He was 20 and now he's dead, something that was almost certainly part of his plan. I condemn this violent attempt on the life of Donald Trump, and I'm very grateful that he survived with minimal injury. My sincere condolences go out to the family of the individual who was killed and those who were injured. This is not who we're meant to be. For the rest of us, the absurd conspiracy theorist crap coming from the left and the right is embarrassingly stupid, irresponsible, and a lot of the comments are not only wholly inconsistent with critical thinking and skepticism, but humanism as well. Project 2025 is still an issue, and so is every other issue we've been talking about this entire time. It is naive to think that this incident yesterday won't change anything. It absolutely will. But the focus needs to remain on opposing Christian nationalism and fascism, and this incident not only makes that much more difficult, it makes it much more necessary. So let's get callers lined up. You've got a scientist and Bible scholar and then another dipshit on this side of the screen, and you're kind of stuck with me for like 2 shows. I get to do this one with Aaron, and then at the Sunday show after dark, I'm filling in for a sick host, and Paul and I will be doing that one. It is a perfect opportunity for you to call in and present your case for what you believe and why. So for now, we're going to get right back to the business of addressing beliefs. Aaron, well, what's wrong with believing in God in the first place? Why can't we just, run with it? Why shouldn't that just be okay?
If belief in God is just your opinion, man, then the dude abides. Thing is, how rare is it that it's just a belief and has no connections to any other things, or is the result of other faulty thought processes, which should be addressed? Just because, in general, if you have bad reasons for believing things, it probably generates all sorts of other bad beliefs that can be harmful to others, to oneself, or at least not achieving what you possibly could. So, how about we figure out what's true rather than just make excuses for believing what we already happen to have picked up from our parents or from our culture?
Yeah, this is something that I raised over and over again, and it often gets lost because uh, let's not mince words. In the discussions, oh, I can be acerbic and dickish and resort to oh, I don't know, not always the calmest and name calling free responses on occasion. And so some people seem to get the impression that I somehow have an issue with religious people or am just de facto anti, God thing. No, the only thing that I care about is whether or not beliefs have been supported by sufficient evidence to make acceptance of them worthy. And so while the conversations get heated, first of all, I'm a former believer who was going to be a preacher. My IQ didn't go up when I stopped believing. As a matter of fact, all the evidence suggests that it is declining and will continue to decline as I age. And the frustrating thing is that it is a situation where people have their sincere beliefs. And as I was mentioned to Aaron right before we started, we live in a time where right now we have more and better access to more and better information and knowledge and understanding of the universe that we live in than ever before. And I think we're seeing consequences of failing to give people the tool set to navigate that information to where it's like when I forget the specific condition someone can find them in, where they basically choice paralysis, where if you're at the grocery store and there's like two different types of mustard, it's pretty
Hmm.
easy to make a decision. But if there's 18 different types of mustard, now all of a sudden it's this catatonic, almost freezing. I can't make a decision. You may even leave with no mustard when that's what you came to the store for. And I worry that we're looking at it, the wonder and joy of um, an interconnected, internet-driven world where we're just unable to ever pick the right kind of mustard.
Or you are so down the rabbit hole in conspiracies that you think mustard actually exists.
Yes, fair. On that note, we've got a couple callers already lined up. Let me get the announcements out of the way for other shows that are happening on this network this week. And that is, as I mentioned, I'm doing the Sunday show now. We'll go until whatever time we end up stopping, but it'll definitely be with enough time for me to get a break before I do the Sunday show after dark tonight at 7 with Paulogia. Looking forward to that one as well. Monday Skeptalk is also 6 p.m. Central. John Gleason and Aron Ra. Tuesdays Chewed Gum is at 6 p.m. with Eve and Alyssa. Wednesday I will be here on the Hang Up. We suspect right now that my co-host will be Andrew Seidel. We are still waiting. Excuse me. We're still waiting for the final confirmation for that, but I don't know that it's possible we could have picked a better guest for a better week, considering all the stuff that's going on. On Thursday's Transatlantic Calling Show, you've got Josie Caballero and Alexander there for that. And then I guess next Sunday, Jimmy and Eve will be here for the Sunday show before dark, and I will be doing the Sunday show after dark with Eric from Skeptics and Scoundrels. So that's everything that's going on here. Aaron, do you have any announcements that we need to get knocked out before we jump in on all these calls?
Nothing coming to mind, and I think we got all the important things out of the way. So let's hop into what is on the callers' minds.
Sweetness. And Noah, pronouns they, them, from Egypt, is calling in about how to choose what to dismiss and what to accept as truth. So kind of, on target from what you and I were just discussing. Noah, welcome to the show. You're on with Aaron and Matt.
Hey, can you hear me all right?
Yeah, although there's some really high-pitched something frequently going off in the back.
Oh, it's my notifications. Let me silence that for a minute. Yeah. So I recently read about a short novel that shook my beliefs to the core. I don't want to
Noah?
talk for too long. It's called the
Noah?
Country of the Blind.
No,
And basically it's about someone.
Hang on. Noah, can you move just a little further away from your mic? You're really spiking the mic and it's getting crackly to where I can't even understand what you're saying.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Is this better?
Yes.
Yeah, so far. Yeah, just stay a little bit further away from the mic and keep going, please.
Okay. So what I was saying is I found a short story called The Country of the Blind, and it got me thinking. So the story is about someone who arrives at a country where people have like genetically evolved to be born without eyes, right? For whatever reason, like the reasons are very contrived, right? And they have heightened senses, and he tries to rule over them by convincing them he can see and that like he has sight, and that's something they'd never seen before. And he does all these sort of experiments to confirm to them that he has what is called sight. And they just don't believe him because every proof he can muster up, they can dismiss as like being some other thing, right? Like I can see the sun shining. Well, I can feel the sun on my skin. That's nothing, right? And in the end, they accuse him of being crazy because he has like these tumors in his brain, these two ball-shaped tumors in his brain, and like you can marry into the tribe, but you have to pull these tumors out, right? And in the end, they end up pulling his eyes out, and that got me thinking, like, what sort of situation could that guy be in to have something so very true and so very integral to his life, but like he has no way to prove it, right? And my problem here is, so like the basic premise is I want to believe as many true things as I can, and I want to disbelieve as many false things as I can, right? But like by skepticism, you're missing out on that first part, right? Because by being skeptic, you only believe things that have good evidence that can be shown via naturalism or with other means. And like I've sort of come to the conclusion that not everything that's true has good evidence. And I'm sort of grappling with the fact where, like, how can I know that things that I dismiss as being false are actually truly false?
Okay.
Yeah, that's
There's
it.
a lot
That's
there.
my,
Aaron, you want to
that's
start?
my spiel.
Just to make sure, you said the book or the short story is called The Country of the Blind?
The Country of the Blind. Yes.
Okay. If it's the one I'm thinking of, I have read it, and it's by H.G. Wells. So pretty much every sci-fi fan in the audience should know that name. So if you haven't read other things by H.G. Wells, boy oh boy, you got a lot of good literature ahead of you. But that is beside the point
No,
of
never
what
heard
we're
of the
calling
guy.
about here. Oh, his most famous book is The Time Machine, basically like the first modern time travel novel.
Oh, that seems interesting.
Yeah.
Yes,
but
wait till you meet the
beside the
Morlocks.
point of what you're asking about today. So if memory serves, that I don't remember all of the tests that he was supposed to have tried to do to show that he had this extra sense that the other blind people didn't have. But you would think, at least in theory, you can set up experiments to show that there are things that this person has, skills this person has that other people don't have. Let me give an example of actually how we discovered light that we can't see. You're familiar with prisms, right?
Yes. And
So
I'm
you
familiar
shine
with the
sunlight
experience where
through
like
and a rainbow pops in.
Yeah, and like they put a thermometer next to the prism and it heated up, and they concluded that that could only be IR, right?
It was like, yeah, the first evidence that, hey, there is something heating up this thermometer that apparently has no light landing on it, but there must be some sort of light that isn't visible that's carrying along some sort of thermal energy to that thermometer. So that was just a complete by accident byproduct of discovering one of the weird things about light. So if we can discover things that we can't see by using our other senses, it should seem at least theoretically possible for blind people to accept the idea that light exists. If we can accept invisible light, why can't blind people accept light generally? It's just a matter of, can you set up an experiment demonstrating it well enough and with and avoid enough confounds to make it secure. The other thing that you would mention, though, is true things that we don't have evidence for. In a sense, that is a problem we have because if I were to hop in that time machine from H.G. Wells and go 200 years in the past, if I started talking about Einstein's general theory of relativity, everyone would look at me and say, "What you on about? There's no reason to believe any of that. You have no good reason to think that." And 200 years ago, there was no evidence, theoretical or empirical, that I could point to justify my outlandish ideas that mass can actually warp the fabric of space and time, and that people don't agree on what clocks are set to, or any of those sorts of things. Even though general relativity appears to be true, 200 years ago, there's no reason anyone should have believed me. And I say should because there was no grounds to do so. So, yeah, we will be stuck
Yeah.
not necessarily believing in all the right things just because the evidence isn't there. So, to me, that says what we need to do is basically not say just simply, here's what we believe, here what we don't believe, but have the virtue of being curious and going out and exploring, because we know there are things that we're wrong about. And the only way you're going to correct that is having the mindset that you want to know new, interesting things.
Yeah, like my question deals more with like unknowable things. Like I think that like
How do you know what's
the
unknowable?
knowable things are a subset of truth. I don't know. That's the thing. Like, okay, I once ate crab, right? I don't know if that sentence is true. I have no memory of it. I grew up in a coastal city, so probably, but like no one can prove me wrong. No one can prove me right, and I don't know whether I should believe that sentence or not, right?
Well, I would say that if you don't have sufficient evidence, then not only should you not believe it, but you couldn't believe it. Belief isn't some doxastic choice. You know, you either become convinced or you're not. You said a couple things in your opening that I wanted to kind of address real quick. One is that in the story, the individual, you said that it's kind of unfortunate because he has no way to prove that he has this ability, and yet, as Aaron was pointing out, and as we've addressed many other times, I think this is just a poorly written story, because in reality, I don't think it would be anywhere near difficult enough to demonstrate the ability to detect things. We already can demonstrate to someone who's been blind from birth that other people can in fact see, and similarly, people who have different types of colorblindness, we can demonstrate who has that deficiency and who doesn't, and we can demonstrate that in even to people who are completely blind, that some people can see and process different parts of the color spectrum than others. So the claim that he has no way to prove it, I think it's a construct of the narrative and the frustration there,
It is, yeah.
but not actually in reality. But you said something that tied to me a little bit, because for a while I produced t-shirts that said I want to believe as many true things and as few false things as possible, and you seemed to raise that, and you said, but skepticism is going to keep you to where you're missing out on some true things. And my answer is yes, and it's supposed to, because both parts of that statement, I want to believe as many true things and as few false things as possible, are essential. If you want to believe as many true things as possible, you just believe everything. You will have believed everything that's true. And if you want to believe as few false things as possible, you believe nothing. But if you want a more accurate model, then you want to have the maximal number of true things while having the minimal number of false things. And so what skepticism is saying is that if there's insufficient evidence currently to determine if this is true, then you shouldn't believe it. Now you can say, but now if it's true, then you're missing out on a true thing. And you would be right. But also, if it's false, then I'm missing out on a false thing, which is one thing that I wanted to do. So you don't get to prioritize your objection as if, oh, I'm missing out on something true, and ignore the fact that I might also be missing out on something false, which is the positive outcome that's desirable. If the truth isn't demonstrated, you don't get to throw that in a bucket, and you get to do the same. You have the same problem when you start talking about this is unknowable. I would agree that there are things that are unknown, and that obviously we have limitations on what we can reasonably know now, just like those limitations were different 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago. But when you start saying X is unknowable, it seems to me that you're now making a knowledge claim that you can't justify. And so my only position here on this, believe as many true and as few false things as possible, is that you put skepticism into practice and exercise critical thinking. And yes, there are going to be things that are true that you don't have warrant for yet. And that's unfortunate, but what else would you suggest? Should you just start believing things you suspect are true before there's evidence? Because if you're wrong, you've defeated the entire purpose of exercising skepticism to begin with.
Yeah. I like a lot of what you're saying is resonating with me, but like, do you really believe that the set of unknowables is null?
No, I think there are plenty of things that are that barring some new discovery, like a time machine, I would say there's a number of things that are unknowable.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't know what they are.
Yeah.
I would say we'll probably never know what Tiktaalik tastes like.
It's
and yet if we know, if we have a genetic sample, if we have a genetic sample and we were able to actually recreate the genetics of that animal at some point in the future, or even simulate it, we could probably get a pretty good approximation. And considering that no two crocodiles taste the same, I wouldn't think that any two Tiktaaliks necessarily taste the same, but they're probably similarly enough. But Aaron's right.
How do you know that?
Without a time machine, we can construct some reasonable guesses, but we might not know what it tastes like. But that's okay.
I guess so. Like, I would have liked for there a way to like determine when to curb your skepticism, but I guess like that defeats the whole purpose,
Never.
like you said.
Why would that saying when should you curb your skepticism is like saying, when do you stop using the best tools to measure?
Mm-hmm.
I can imagine what he might be thinking is not to accept anything unless it's proven to like 99.9999% confidence. If we are extreme like the ancient skeptics and not believe anything, except no proposition except those that are absolutely impossible to be false, such as like your own existence, then you become kind of absurd. That just like, I can't trust that there's actually a chair under my butt. I don't trust that the next breath of air I have will actually fill my lungs instead of actually poison me. You could have that sort of skepticism, but I'm pretty sure when we're talking about skepticism, we mean scientific skepticism, have evidence for what you believe, and also, if you disbelieve something, having good reasons for that too. I have no good reason to believe the next breath of air I have will be poisonous. I have no reason to believe my chair will just click out of existence.
Right.
And that's because of, basically a big amount of experience, and if need be, a whole lot of quantum theory.
Nobody drives down the highway with the constant nagging thought of, man, I hope a brick building from an alternate dimension doesn't materialize directly in front of my car while I'm doing 75 or 80 miles an hour. We can't prove that it won't happen. We can enter into science fiction stuff about, the likelihood of it, but none of us live day to day driving down the highway going, gosh, I hope that doesn't. And if we do, I mean, those people need some assistance, because if you're now focused on things that it's more dangerous for you to be focused on this absurdity than it is, you should be focused on the road and the other people driving on the road, I guess. So, but Noah, when you talk about at what point should you suspend skepticism, just to make sure we're talking about the same thing, what is it that you would be suspending, and why would that be preferable?
I guess like when I want to believe my friend or my significant other, while every piece of evidence in my mind points to the opposite. For example, I have no real example of that in my life, but like just an example. Like I know that person to be truthful, but the processes in my mind lead me to suspect otherwise. I'm just like weighing this against that, and I'm suspending skepticism for that one moment.
I'm not completely sure I follow. I think I do. I mean, it may just be that what you're suspending. Let me put it this way: I'm a skeptic. I've been advocating for skeptic for decades. I was a skeptic before I knew what it was. I'm constantly talking critical thinking, skepticism, blah 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 blah. Does that mean that I don't sit around and engage in speculative exercises about possibilities? Of course not. Skepticism is not in any way stopping anyone from investigating and considering even bizarre things. Like, skepticism doesn't say, hey, don't even consider the idea that a brick wall might appear directly in front of you on the road. That's not what skepticism says. All skepticism says is, given the information I have right now, until that changes, I have no good reason to think this is a likely outcome. And so we just don't bother thinking about it. It's not that we've suspended skepticism. What we've done is we've sated our skeptical curiosity and basically put up a little temporary stop of, okay, how many times has somebody claimed that they're speaking with the dead? Well, we've tested it over and over and over again, and nobody's been able to demonstrate so far that there's anything real about that. There's somebody's having some experience. They're saying that they're speaking with the dead, but we have yet to create a causal connection between the supposed medium and the spirit world. We can't even demonstrate that a spirit world exists or anything like that. We've tried testing a number of times. Here's a question. How much time and money should we spend testing each individual that comes forward claiming to speak with the dead if we don't have any more reason to think they're going to be capable and effective at this than anyone else prior? From my standpoint, you reach a point where the new individual making the claim needs to demonstrate something before it's worthwhile spending resources on testing. And this is why the James Randi Educational Foundation would have a preliminary test that was designed in conjunction with this person. But if you were like engaged, we've tested dowsing, it doesn't work. Nobody ever successfully passes a proper, double-blind test on dowsing. Does that mean that nobody can douse? No, it just means that every single time we've tested it, it's failed. And when somebody finally passes the test, we won't have confirmed dowsing. What we will have confirmed is, on this day, in this way, this person was able to demonstrate some actual effect. And then we need to figure out, okay, let's investigate this further. It's not going to be a whoops, the paranormal exists. It's going to be, wow, we finally have a result, and now we have a whole new realm for scientific inquiry into what is
exactly.
This
I think if the paranormal exists, it's just going to be new science. Like, quantum mechanics is very paranormal to me, but like it's just new science. The thing is, like, I'm having a hard time grappling with the submission that everything is true must be demonstrable. You know what I mean?
I don't think that everything that's true needs to be demonstrable. I think that nothing should be believed to be true without it being demonstrable.
This is the difference between things that are true and us actually having true beliefs. That if we have knowledge, then there better be a justification.
Yeah.
And the things that are true that we don't have knowledge for, that's the stuff we get to go out and explore, and why we should keep doing science.
Yeah. Okay. I've wasted enough of your time. I'm sorry. Thank you,
No
and
worries.
thank you for the work you do here. I appreciate it very much.
There was no waste here at all.
Nope. Had a great discussion. Thank you so much, Noah. Call us back when you have more questions, whether they're the wild bong rip questions or just, gosh, I'm having difficulty sorting out how to live in a world where I can't. There are things that we'd all like to know. And I believe, like, I think if you polled all of us right now, there are things that I believe that I may not have strong evidentiary warrant for. And there are probably things that Aron believes that he doesn't have strong evidentiary warrant for. And I think if we figured out what one of those was and you pushed us on it, we would say that what we believe is that we're leaning towards the evidence continuing to move us in this direction on this, because the evidence has moved us in that direction on 35 other things that seem to be related, but that we would both say that in itself is not sufficient. There's a difference between saying, I suspect the evidence will lead us this direction, than X is the truth.
I totally agree.
Thanks so much, Noah.
Well, I'm just gonna say that I've heard a lot of terrible accents on this show, and I know how frustrating they must be. So apologies again.
No, it was a great call. Call me back anytime, Noah. Thanks. All right. In this, it's funny. I hadn't read the call description, and when I raised that issue of being, and even before anybody called in, you and I were talking about before the show, this thing of we have access to so much information, and we might not have equipped everybody or anybody. You have to avoid the arrogance of being like, well, I can sort out the truth. Well, there are people out there who just simply aren't, all of us are prone to making mistakes in thinking and reasoning. But we definitely have people who are more or less equipped at that. If you could change one thing about public education, one foundational criterion or curriculum point that you don't think is being addressed enough or correctly, what would you change?
Ooh. The thing I would probably change would probably be a bit too big, because we have the fundamental problem that if we are going to test students, we're going to look for the things that are easy to measure, and the things that are easy to measure is the stuff we say, hey, student, you need to memorize this so you can prove that you can do it on the test. And once you've made education shitload of things you got to have memorized, rather than, hey, how do we actually come up and figure out what's actually true, and have that sort of conceptual understanding of how we should be approaching things, rather than authorities giving things that need to be regurgitated. That's what I'm suggesting to change. Requires basically changing the entirety of how we do education in both the US and pretty much around the world. So small thing.
Yeah, it's, I've said before, I'd like us to construct a curriculum that teaches the basics of critical thinking. It doesn't necessarily have to be called skepticism, critical thinking. I remember when I was growing up, I had a teacher that introduced me to Games magazine, which oddly enough, I don't think I have one sitting right next to me, even though I have hundreds of them scattered around the house. It's a great magazine. It's logic puzzles, crossword puzzles, it's inventive stuff, but they also cover, just games as well. I love the magazine. It's outstanding. I started getting it when I was in maybe 6th or 7th grade. I'm not completely sure. And then at the time, it was owned and published by Playboy, even though it had nothing pornographic or problematic in it at all. But when my dad read the masthead and saw that it was, a Hugh Hefner publication, he canceled my subscription because he didn't want any of his money going to Hugh Hefner. And so there was a period of several years where I didn't get the magazine. Now I get it. And I rarely, I probably have 5 or 6 months of them that aren't even opened. They're probably still in the plastic just because I haven't got a chance to get to it, which I'm not going to throw them away because there's some really cool puzzle stuff in those. And I love the magazine. Take that and something like the books that were influential on me when I was younger, things like the Phantom Toll Booth, things like the Donald in Math Magic Land video that I constantly recommend to people. It was strange to me that I learned things about how to solve problems, how to troubleshoot, etc., that I don't know that we're teaching now. Like this teach to the test thing you're talking about. I've had the mantra for years of don't teach kids what to think, teach them how to think. But I genuinely don't know enough to know how to best do that. How do you inspire discovery, inquiry, creativity? How do you inspire the joy of figuring out what the right answer almost certainly is? Like I remember early on in the Navy when I was in ETA school, we were taking just basic troubleshooting class where you're outlining circuits and AND gates, OR gates, XOR gates, and all that stuff, and you're trying to find the fault. It was gamified to where it was genuinely exciting. And I had an electronics kit when I was a little kid, and I built my first computer. Does stuff like that even happen? I don't know, because I don't have kids.
It does, because when I taught high school, I incorporated that into my physics teaching curriculum.
Well,
and
there we go.
Yeah, so basically, part of it is you want to give the kids agency in what they're learning. One of the books I have behind me is a biography of John Dewey, an American philosopher from the early 20th century.
Yep.
Early signer of the Humanist Manifesto, so he's on our side. And one of his famous works was Democracy in Education, that basically making the argument that to make education in some sense like a bit more real and actually useful, that you basically want to make the classroom more democratic, that you basically want the students actually involved in the learning rather than just being pots that you fill with water that you call facts or knowledge. A lot of his stuff has become foundational to like modern education theory.
There's certainly some warrant to talking about rote memorization and how to make that fun. I mean, I think probably the strongest argument for that is Schoolhouse Rock. And probably some elements of things from like Sesame Street and the Electric Company and all of those. But Schoolhouse Rock, if you think about it, for those who didn't grow up with this, it's like 30 some odd little short videos that would play, Saturday morning. But also I had teachers that would play some of them in school. Basically, if you got a substitute teacher and they wheeled the TV in, you knew you were getting like Come and Meet the Letter People and Schoolhouse Rock stuff. But those songs are still in my head and they're informative. And Monty Python's Universe song. Tons and facts and figures about the universe. And I think Aaron's froze.
But I shouldn't be frozen.
Just hit a refresh, Aaron, if you can.
Just hit a refresh, it'll work out. But nope, the video's frozen. So we can hear you, but your video's frozen. Anyway, in addition to like the Schoolhouse Rock, you think about Monty Python and the Universe song, where you've got this, we're in a universe that's expanding in all the directions it can whiz. It's orbiting at 19 miles a second, so it's reckoned the sun that is the source of all of it. It keeps going on, and there's factual data in there about we're 30,000 light years from galactic central point. We go around every 200 million years. There's good rough estimates of information in that song, and because the song's fun, it sticks in your head. While we're working on Aaron's thing, I'm gonna try and take another call real quick here, and that's Kathy in Texas, pronouns of she, her. Thank you so much for calling in, Kathy. We're trying to fix Aaron's video and stuff right now. How are you, and what's going on?
I am doing good, Matt. Hopefully Aaron gets back soon. So the reason I called is I live in Texas, and I participate in a market as a vendor that is run by a LGBTQ plus group in our general area. And yesterday at market, there was a group of Baptist protesters, and you can imagine how well that went. They were definitely saying some pretty nasty things, calling us all rapists and pedophiles, et cetera, spouting Bible verses that they thought, supported their view and whatnot, and generally being very nasty about things. And of course, we did not back down. We did not leave. Cops were called twice on them. And basically, the way it was left, they finally left, and basically stating they would be back the next time we come back after our summer hiatus, which would be in October. And so the reason I'm calling is because obviously, I think, we can't just let the market be shut down because of this, and we're definitely wanting to stand up to them, but we want to do it safely and effectively.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering if you have any advice or resources, anything like that.
So as always, I'm going to recommend that you reach out to Freedom from Religion Foundation, American Atheists,
Okay.
Atheists United for Separation of Church and State, those types of things, to maybe see what resources are potentially available to you. But I think calling the police is probably already a good start. One of the things is wherever this sort of market is, somebody's in charge of that space. Is it the city? Is it okay? In that case,
it's the city.
It would be time to reach out to the city council to say, we love this city. We've been supporting this city by having this market here, but we are concerned about our safety. We would like for the city to make a statement in support of this market and our right to assemble, and to provide, security at these events for those people who aren't willing to live and let live.
Right. Okay. Any other suggestions? Obviously, I see all the things in chat about, recovering from religion and et cetera, which I'm taking down as notes. Any other suggestions? Any other way that we can handle the situation nicely? Obviously, we are using the police as appropriate, and that did work. Yeah, you showed the police blotter. Okay, and stuff like that. So,
if there's decent internet access at the market, it like I would have one of the front booths on the side where the protesters tend to show up. Get one of those spin the wheel type things, and just have it there with a camera live streaming that spin the wheel, and just past it to where the protesters are. And every time a protester gets within range of the camera, we spin the wheel and pick some charity to donate another $1 to. And so now you're kind of turning their own, things against them. And, just the solidarity of everybody sitting there working the market, it's already too much for them to handle. That's why they're protesting.
Right.
They don't want to wake up in a world where all these queers get to say and do whatever they want. This is supposed to be my country and God's country and whatever else. And so I think that finding a way to kind of live stream it, make them look bad, donate stuff in their name.
Okay.
But yeah, definitely talk to the city and make sure that the city is going to make it safe. Protesting is a right.
It is. And that was one of the things that was discussed when we all were there, was they have the right to be there. We need to figure out how to handle this appropriately without stepping on their First Amendment rights. And that was definitely something that did happen yesterday, was that we allowed them to have their say, but we were not quiet about it.
So Aaron's
and
back
on the plus side, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was just saying Aaron's back now. I didn't know if he had something to add on this as well, but go ahead.
Cool. No, especially since I missed out on some of the important context. I don't have anything useful to add, unfortunately.
Cool.
Okay. But I will say on the plus side, and this is hopeful, is that the others in the city did see what was going on. And I can tell you that that market was packed a hell of a lot more than it usually is, especially on a hot summer day. And all of us walked away with like 3 to 4 times what we were expecting that day in money, in sales. The community came out and supported in that way. So yeah.
I learned a lesson when I was younger. The short version is that I tried to buy a Chevy S10 Blazer, brand new from a dealership in Norfolk, Virginia. And they let me drive it off the lot while they were finishing the other paperwork. And I went back. I was in the Navy at the time. And so I went back to the ship. I was on duty the next day when they called and threatened to have me arrested for stealing the car because they had given it to me. But the financing hadn't completely worked out and they needed me to come back in. And I was like, I'm on duty now. So I had to get permission from to basically leave, take this vehicle back. And then I get there and they're like, we think we found a way to make the financing work. And all you have to do is buy this extended warranty plan and that will change the financing stuff. And then you can get it. And I was like, no, they kept my $1,500 deposit that I had put in on that car because they'd done so much work to try to get the financing through, even after threatening to report the car stolen and get me in trouble. And they did this to an active duty military person in a military town. I didn't do the one thing that I should have done. And that is I should have called the local news and said, I'm an active duty member of the United States Navy, and I'm being scammed and ripped off and threatened by a car dealership. Would one of you like to come down and report on this situation? I guarantee you I would be $1,500 richer today at a minimum because I would have got the deposit back if I had done that. Getting a hold of the local news may also be, if you're not getting, especially if the city's not being responsive, get the news to come in and show why isn't the city providing protection for this?
Okay. Perfect. I'm writing all this down. So if it seems like I'm a little distracted, that's perfect. I love that. Get the media involved as well as the calling the city. Okay. All right. Well, thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Kathy.
Any other comments or thoughts?
Nope. Go ye therefore unto the world and enjoy your LGBTQ plus IA marked market.
Yes.
And be safe and sell stuff.
Thank you.
Yeah, as somebody who has a hobby turned small business that has us at expos, I get that. We don't, I don't tend to get protesters at any of the reptile expos that we do. We're doing 2 of them. Yeah, 2 of them in August and 2 of them in September and 1 in October. So there'll be 5 weeks out of the next 12 or 13 weeks where we'll be at reptile expos. Generally, we don't find protesters there. And
that's actually a little surprising because I would expect Aron Ra to show up and say reptile isn't a valid cladistic category.
Fair. Aron does show up at most of the ones that we're at. But I've never heard him, suggest that we're making a mistake by having a reptile expo just because it's not cladistic. But it would be, it'd be funny. But we don't get protesters, and so Arden and I are there, and I don't get anti-atheist protesters. I don't get anti-LGBTQIA protesters. We're there selling our reptiles and engaging with the public and doing a lot on educating. I bet at each one of these things, I spend whoever in chat told you the lines are full. The lines aren't full. I spend a good deal of time at these expos. First of all, encouraging kids, because lots of families will bring their kids because it's kind of like going to the free reptile petting zoo. You get to come see a bunch of things. A lot of people aren't there to actually buy. Some of them are, but I I've given away snakes for free to people for, as kids as their first time pet, provided they get their parents' permission. I don't just hand snakes to wandering children and say, go have fun. We also encourage good husbandry, and I tell them the single most important thing you're going to buy is a thermostat that actually controls the heat so that you can maintain the right hotspot, etc. We do a teaching on that, but we also teach a lot on genetics, and we go through the difference between dominant and incomplete dominant traits and recessive traits, and talk about the difficulty of producing something like an inception where you've got two recessive traits and an incomplete dominant trait, which means the two recessive traits you've got to get from both parents, and then you could get the incomplete from either one of them, and that makes this snake. And why is this snake valued at $2,000 as opposed to $400 or $200 or whatever else? There's a lot of stuff like that goes on, and there would be plenty of opportunities for somebody to come in and protest for irrelevant things. I find it strange that Kathy's talking about a market that's probably like any other farmer's market or community market. I don't think they're all just because it's run by the LGBTQIA community doesn't mean everything they're selling there is queer. It's like, oh, I'm selling my raspberry jam. Well, you filthy homosexual, how dare you sell your raspberry jam here? What is the justification for this outrage and attacking on people just trying to have a fun market? All right. Getting back to the callers, we've got, is it Tommaso from Italy? My apologies if I'm... Is that correct?
Oh, don't worry. Sorry. First of all, do you hear me all right?
We hear you just fine. Welcome to the show.
Okay, thank you. It's Tommaso, basically. It works. Yeah. So my question was like, as an atheist, I see living in a country with a very religious background, as I guess you can imagine. The faith is very socially spread around, and so most of my relatives are indeed religious. And understanding that I was an atheist, I found a growing gap of understanding with them. And my open question was, in your personal experiences, how do you have learned to handle with that? I am 25, so I don't know yet how to deal with something like that, and I was looking on you to gain some tips.
Yeah, I'm gonna start with Aron, because I genuinely don't know if Aron, have you got religious family members that you find yourself in conflict with on occasion? And if so, how do you handle it?
Honestly, not so much. So a bit interesting though that the most of my family is Catholic, but even though we're not Italian in background, there is the phrase in at least American English parlance, Italian Catholic is synonymous also with cafeteria Catholic, where that might be the cultural background, but what do you take from the religion? Whatever you feel like. You go to the cafeteria, you take whichever bit of pie or fish or whatever that it is you prefer, and leave the stuff you don't care about. For the most part, it's just not even an issue because it's not something that we discuss that much. And insofar as things are there, I care about my family and my relationship with them much more than being right in an argument. And I think that's probably the most important thing is when it's friends, when it's family, you have to remind yourself you care about these people, and you need to make sure you care about these people more than you're feeling about being right or righteous. That is something that I think is something that should always be at least in the back of your mind, if not the forefront, when you're having these discussions. Remember, you care about these people.
Yeah. First of all, sorry, I realized my mistake into automatically assuming that you had experiences of what I am living through. So like here goes the entire premise of my call. And the thing is, it's never really been about me trying to go forth with my points whenever it happens on like dinner time or anything. It's just that when the concept emerges, not by my own volition, but like because it's the news of the day or whatever, I see them always like perceiving me as fundamentally different because of this, and trying to cope with the fact that they see me in a different way just because they don't understand what I that I don't believe.
I'm
Okay,
sorry, I
that is
might have missed
harder.
a part of that. You're focused on more, not whether you're focused less on agreement than you are trying to find that they understand why you don't believe.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good thing. I've toyed with this. I'm gonna do a slight side rant here for a minute, Tommaso. Um, I've thought about this thing, you know, despite suspicions, I am a fan of kindness, and I would like to constantly make improvements to what I do and how I do it. And so we had this I had this thought and had a discussion with a couple people of, what if I just treated every caller as if they're a family member? Well, to some extent, I already do, provided that family member is a Trump supporting uncle that I don't give that much of a shit about. Um, and so that happens. But then the thing was like, no. What if you treated every caller like their immediate family? Like, this is, you know, a brother, a sister, a parent, and its immediate family. I don't know how much of that would change, because you know, I've had incredible arguments, heated arguments with my own mom on these subjects. And yes, I'm always going to be nicer and ease back on my mom over other, but I think some people would be surprised the extent to which my mom and I argued about a good deal of these subjects. And I think people overestimate um, this notion of trying to find agreement or understanding, as opposed to just recognizing we may not be the same, but that does not mean that we have to, you know, have conflict. But the reality is, as it stands right now, when you, for me, and this is going to get political briefly for just a moment, when you're fighting against something like Project 2025, or let's set aside Project 2025 just for a second. Don't forget about it. Still there, still an issue. But anything like, there's a great divide in American politics where fully half of the population seems to have a demonstrably false and backward understanding of the facts of reality. Like, the statistic I've mentioned 50 times in the last couple of weeks is 49% of people thought that unemployment was at a 30-year high when it was actually at a 30-year low. And there's a number of other things like that where the reality of the situation is the exact opposite of what some people believe. Recognizing that this happens with fact-based, data-driven positions is more troubling to me than the notion that, you know, one of my debate, we'll go with Than Christopoulos. Sorry, Than. That one of my debate opponents and we disagree on whether or not, you know, there's a God. We may agree on other things. And at the end of the day, we could find that close relatives, people we love and treat with kid gloves and we're kinder to in general, are more of a problem than the random person out there. Because my partner has family members that are actively going to vote to basically make her life less safe, less free, less joyful, less legal. There are people out there right now who are updating their passports and making plans for a number of different, catastrophes. There are people tossing around, the concept of civil war and other things and conflicts. So while you're trying to get your family to understand you, and awesome, if you figure out exactly how to do that, by all means, share it. I'm less concerned about whether or not my family members understand what I believe or why than whether or not they think that myself and the people I care about should have rights and freedoms and what kind of world they want to build. Because if they actively want to build a world that is not only worse, but is dangerous to, you can be anti-LGBTQIA all you want. But if you want to build a world that is dangerous to those people, that's a different thing altogether. That's no longer a difference of opinion. Now it's about, how do you live cooperatively with people who don't think you should have the rights to be yourself? That's a bigger deal to me in many cases than whether or not somebody believes in God. I realize they're often tied to the same root and same mistakes in thinking, but
Yeah, I think that what I'm trying to find an answer to is to to uh, how to reconcile the desire of being in understanding with those who you love when when because of circumstances and personal beliefs this can not necessarily be the case. I should clarify that there is also a deeper layer that I didn't want to dive into, that I know that I am like LGBT, well, pansexual, but still I think within the category. And
you greedy individual, how dare you be pansexual?
not my fault. And whenever I talk about any of these issues, knowing that I have had same-sex relationships completely hidden from them, I see them fully not understanding this. So yeah. I didn't want to add this layer, not to make the question too much complicated and too broad. Yeah. But there is also like this whole new level of the perceptions that will change when you tell them something that you have hidden. Like, I guess, how to handle coming out of the closet. I think that's how you say it in English. And that is like not really what I don't like want to change the topic of the question as we go forward. But like, yeah. And so it's tough, basically. Moreover, I think that there is, as you said, attention in your country for the political circumstances that you are in currently that are so different from ours that I understand the shift in worry.
Yeah.
Like, we have it pretty badly here with our current government and all, but I don't think we are as likely to go where you're going. Like, but it's not a competition, you know?
No, I hope not, because it'd also be nice to point to Italy as a shining example. I haven't been there in years. I was stationed for just a week or so in Sigonella, Sicily, and then also while I was in the Navy, I managed to stop at one or two ports in Italy. But I always loved it. But it was weird that the U.S. government would warn us about things, and one of the things that they warned us about in a number of different places were vendors trying to take advantage of military personnel. But in Italy in particular, especially as we pulled into port and there was just trash and garbage and condoms, just right out there in the sea and everything else. They were telling us about, well, I'll just skip that because it's not relevant to any of this stuff right now. Tommaso, it is, I don't know what resources you've got in your area, but I really think that one of the aspects of this is if your family at least knows who you are, even if they might despise the things that you believe or the things that you do or who you are, but they're willing to set that aside to maintain the peace in having conversations and interaction with you. It sucks to say so. That might be the best you can hope for as a start, but if you keep working with that, it's very difficult for people to be vehemently anti-queer, vehemently anti-atheist once they meet, know, and love or recognize that there's somebody in their family who they already love and care about, who fits one of those categories. It's one of the reasons why so many government individuals who've been, oh, no gay marriage, no gay marriage, no gay marriage. And then when it turns out, their niece or their nephew is queer, all of a sudden they change their position. Or when they get caught, at a roadside bathroom with somebody of the same gender, all of a sudden it changes their position. I think just keep focusing on the path you've got so that your loved ones know you care about them and you would like for there to be a good relationship, but that you are still willing to draw boundaries because your health and happiness is going to take priority over constant conflict with family members.
Thank you. Thank you for the wisdom and beautiful words. And thank you, Aron, as well, for your for being there.
I hope a tiny bit.
Yeah. And last thing before, but you made me understand my mistake, which is like good on its own. And the last thing is, Matt, I want a beard like yours. I need it.
Thank you. I didn't even know I could have this beard. Thank you so much, Tommaso. I'm going to let you go. Thank you. That's very kind.
Thank you.
I had no idea I could even grow a beard like this. This is as big as it gets, by the way. Aaron can probably tell you about the specific science behind follicle strength and how your hair grows to a basically prescribed limit and there's virtually nothing you can do. Like I couldn't get a 3-foot long beard. Somebody else might, but for whatever reason, the hair follicles on my face just aren't strong enough to hold hair once it gets past, 6 or 7 inches.
At some point, you have to probably do some special maintenance or tie things up to spread out the stress on any particular hair follicle. But I have not tried to have that long of a beard, and for the most part, when it does get that long, I'm just overheating, and so I need to fix that.
It's funny because I'm in Texas, and but I stay inside where it's air conditioning, and so plus I have a solar panel from here up, and so the beard warms part that needs to be warmed, I guess. But who knows? Hey, we've got theistic caller, and before we take this theistic caller, first of all, let me say a huge thank you. But if you're a theist out there, if you're someone who believes in some God, you can always call in and say, I believe in this God, here's the features, and here's why I believe. Similarly, if you have supernatural religious beliefs that you suspect that we don't share, but you think we should, by all means, call in and defend that. Don't call in if you just have some esoteric, nondescript God that you can't demonstrate and don't care to demonstrate, because we'd be happy to have a conversation with you about something else, like why it is that you're believing something that you acknowledge you can't or don't have evidentiary warrant for. That could be a potentially interesting conversation. But the people who've been calling in from time to time to defend some sort of esoteric, homegrown, bong hit version of oh, everybody else has misunderstood the Bible, but I got it right. Unless you're actually willing to state, here's what I believe and here's why everybody else should believe it too, I don't think that's probably going to fly. But we do have Marcus in Oregon, pronouns are him, who's a former atheist that came to belief in God supposedly through science and is interested on our take on things. So it's a great day with Aron here, or not Aron, Aaron here. Aron will be on next week. So Marcus, you're on with Aaron Adair. And what science led you to God?
Oh, I started to take on the subject of quantum physics. I think the whole concept I avoided for quite a while. And then I started studying it in consciousness, and the whole thing was baffling. Couldn't wrap my mind around it. But as I began to dig deeper into it and realize that, of course, it's true, that started to really shake my atheism, because basically materialistic or mechanical determinism just didn't seem to fit that. And I realized, okay, if that's a problem, then maybe there's some other problems with my world belief system. And so then I decided, okay, I want to know, instead of just taking things for granted. And so I decided to spend several months, which actually ended up becoming several years. And I studied the science of lots of different fields, got really, really deep into it, and looked at what the experts said on both sides. What the best atheists said, what the best intelligent designers or whatever said. And then that's when I came to my conclusion. But I do want to say one thing, though. I just found out very recently. Well, my conclusion is that there's a God. There's no way around it, whether I like it or not.
What do you know about that God? What do you mean by God? What characteristics does that God have?
Well, he would have to have characteristics that are not made up of anything that's inside of the universe. So he's not made of anything inside of this universe. He's outside of this universe.
I don't know that really tells me. I don't know if it really tells me much of anything. When I'm looking, and I'm going to kind of opt out of this here in just a second, because Aaron's well more versed on the quantum mechanics and other stuff. But when I say, hey, what are the characteristics of your God? And you're like, well, he's not made of stuff inside the universe. You haven't really told me much of anything. And I can't, it's hard to even come up with a follow-up question, because the point of me saying, what are the characteristics of this God, is we need to define what it is that you're advocating for. And then you need to make a case for it, because even if materialistic mechanical determinism didn't blow up your skirt, that tells us nothing about whether or not there's any kind of God. And when the only characteristic, or the first characteristic you can give me, is that it's not made of stuff in the universe, I need you to define the God better and then explain how you got there.
Well, then I need to know what you mean by characteristics. I was just assuming that you meant what I was trying to explain.
Is God a conscious being?
Yeah, of course.
How do you know that?
How could it be otherwise?
Okay, that's a fallacious argument. And in order to maintain my zen and to give you time with somebody who understands a good chunk of this way better than I do, I'm going to let Aaron jump in here, because literally my frustration level, and I've got to do 2 shows today, when I ask people, how do you know something? And the answer is, how could it be otherwise? You're not ready.
Whoa.
So
hold on.
I'll sidetrack here.
No. I am ready.
No, sir, you're not, which is why I'm going to stop. But you might be ready for a conversation in a way that I'm not ready for. So I'll let you. Aaron's going to have follow-up questions.
Finish anything.
No, sir. That's a blatant lie, Marcus. Not only did I let you finish, but all I did was ask you a question and ask you to tell me what it is that you believe, and then asked you to justify a claim you make. You made a claim that God is a conscious being. I asked, how do you know that? And when you came back with, how could it stop talking? When you came back with, how can it be otherwise? I opted out because of the bizarrely fallacious line of reasoning that is. And then you accused me of not letting you finish. Now, I'm going to stop talking because if I don't, I'm going to demand that you apologize before I hang up on your ass, and that doesn't do any of us any good. So let me exercise some kindness, shift off to the side here, and see if maybe Aron has a question that you might be better equipped to answer his question.
All right, I will take my cue. So, Marcus, you started off, you said, with your journey when it came to understanding or interpreting quantum mechanics. So, let's start with that. So, you said that was according to. Sorry, say that again.
Yeah, that was the beginning of it.
Yeah. So, like I say, let's start from the beginning. It's a very good place to start. You said that you understand quantum mechanics requiring consciousness. Could you elaborate on why you have that conclusion?
Well, my understanding of quantum physics now doesn't necessarily reflect what was happening in the beginning. In the beginning, the explanations and the theories that I was absorbing or being exposed to were laying that type of concept out. And that's one of the reasons why I was baffling. And that was the thing that led to, the whole journey and all of that. Now it's not quite that certain because a lot of new things are coming out now, especially in the field of consciousness. So, but those theories that I was originally exposed to were that it takes a conscious observer to, pinpoint the event and all of this kind of thing. And I thought, well, wait a second, if consciousness has something to do with this definitely doesn't seem materialistic. It doesn't even seem mechanical. But one thing I wanted to step back from, and apologize to both of you, is I do not mean to be argumentative. And I do respect both of you. Matt, I remember from my atheist days, and I don't mean any disrespect whatsoever. So please take that into consideration.
I just need you to talk to Aron and answer the questions.
Yeah. All right. So I'm still a little bit hung up on you saying that observations in quantum mechanics require consciousness. And I'm going to just say that's actually not true. To do anything that we would call a measurement or an observation in quantum mechanics requires some sort of interaction, and the interactors don't need to be conscious. Two electrons observe each other and interact with each other by the electromagnetic force, by the exchange of photons, so for example. That doesn't require consciousness on the part of either electron or the photon. Nobody has to be watching what's going on for this interaction to exist.
I would agree with that. That's why the beginning
consciousness isn't necessary or even important to quantum mechanics.
Right. But consciousness, though, still is an integral part of existence. And like I said,
why would
the
you say
beginning
that?
Was confused.
Well, here's the thing, though. If quantum mechanics, which is like a foundational theory to how the universe works, doesn't require consciousness, neither does general relativity, by the way. If, like, the foundational physics that explains everything from the beginning of time as far back as we can go to now doesn't require consciousness, why would you say consciousness is somehow fundamental? It's not there in the fundamental theories.
Well, first off, what I was first exposed to, I no longer believe. So I don't think that consciousness necessarily has to have any part of quantum physics. But that was the thing that first started to blow my mind, was these theories that some people had. And those theories, by the way, were way back in the beginning of quantum physics by some of the different scientists and stuff. And we have a different understanding of that now. And I understand exactly what you're saying, and I'm pretty much on board. It's difficult to say, but you do know, though, that there's a new development. I think it's Penrose, who's suggesting that quantum physics has a part of consciousness, that consciousness is held, I think, in some type of a quantum field or something like that. Have you heard about that?
What Penrose has suggested, and he first wrote this in a book called The Emperor's New Brain, if I'm not mistaken, along with who knows how many other papers. I have to check that. But basically that there are supposed to be structures in the brain that can actually maintain quantum superpositions longer than you'd expect, and these more stable quantum superpositions and all the weirdness that happens with that can actually manifest at a macroscopic scale, and when they collapse, that these sorts of things are somehow related to consciousness. Honestly, I don't even get the idea of something is quantum, therefore there's consciousness. To me, that has always looked like this is weird, so therefore they're related. That's always how that argument has looked to me. Now, if you're talking about recent developments, there was apparently some recent study suggesting the existence of brain structures that seem to have like the possibility of maintaining signals that might also carry quantum information longer than expected. I have not looked into that. I'm still hung up more on the problem of why does consciousness or wave collapse have anything to do with what consciousness is? That's the point that I just feel like premise 1, there's quantum mechanics. Premise 2, question mark. Premise 3, profit. I'm really hung up on premise 2, how you get the things connected together.
Well, we still have a real problem with consciousness, the hard problem and all of that. But I would say that
I don't know how quantum mechanics even helps address it. All you can, the most I can think of is because of quantum mechanics having this randomness element to it, it could help then explain how our brains jump to things that you wouldn't have otherwise expected. But unexpected isn't the same thing as consciousness, and honestly, if that's actually how consciousness is, that it's basically just the roll of dice, it sounds like my brain is an oversized D&D game.
No, well, I look at it more as a field of possibility, where we get
what does
to
that
choose.
mean?
But when we look at physics, right, it's all a matter of fields and things like that. And when we look at quantum physics, we have the uncertainty principle, but there are certain limitations within that, so that an electron can't be just anywhere. It has to be within a certain range, and I believe now that we do have active choice and free will. Let me ask you this: is there any possibility that consciousness could be in the realm of a non-materialistic type of framework?
Honestly, I don't even know how immaterialism actually helps, because what happens there is they just say the fundamental material is conscious. So where does consciousness come from? The stuff that's conscious. It feels like, oh, you are answering the question by just restating the question. It feels like there's no progress. How do we have consciousness? We have conscious stuff. Thanks. While conversely, on a materialist paradigm, you could at least try to build up and say interactions between brain cells by the connections of neurons, and the structures there can be at least analogous to how we do logic gates in electronics that allow us to, well, have this computer currently working in front of me and do things, especially if I load a primitive version of ChatGPT onto there, and all of a sudden it's at least doing things that start to look like consciousness. Not that I'm saying what happens in a computer, what happens in a brain is identical, but that we can work up from basic material, non-conscious stuff and get stuff to pop out that starts to at least look like things making choices or things aware of their surroundings. The stuff that we ascribe to consciousness, that at least looks like we're making progress one other place. The other one is just saying, the stuff of consciousness is conscious stuff. It feels like it's not even attempting to make progress. All it's doing is just saying, I don't know how materialism does it, therefore magic dust. It just really feels like not even trying to help. And it also doesn't help the fact that in many ways, it looks like consciousness is kind of on a scale of things. So I am unconscious when I'm asleep. I'm kind of partially conscious before I get my coffee in the morning. My cat has a lower level of consciousness than I do, but it's still the same sort of stuff. So how is it that we basically look at, say, hey, it looks like there's this great relationship between the brain structure, and levels of consciousness, But saying, but actually what's going on is something immaterial and the brain has nothing to do with it. It just happens to be really ducking correlated with everything that we would call conscious experience. If I mess with your brain, I mess with your consciousness. That is hard to expect on non-material theories.
Well, I think there's definitely a link between the two, but I don't necessarily think that explains the totality of it. But I would say this, though, that
Hang on,
is a field
Marcus.
a material thing.
Marcus.
Mhm.
So I'm still waiting for any sort of demonstration that any of this points to there being some kind of God that's a conscious being. But when you respond, when Aaron's pointing out things like, hey, you can inject chemicals into a brain and alter what we describe as consciousness. And then you're like, yeah, I see that, but I don't think it's enough to explain it totally. So we went from how could it be
No.
otherwise? We went from a fallacious, how could it be otherwise, to now a fully, once we've delved
Okay.
into the actual subject, you're like, yeah, but I don't think that's enough. I think there has to be more. Well, whether or not you suspect there has to be more is useless until you can make a case for why there needs to be something more and why you're justified in believing that something more is a conscious God.
Okay. All right. When we look at the universe using physics, right? We can boil
the
this
universe in
a
many
lot of
different
this
ways,
down.
but we can look at it using physics, sure.
Right. And we boil it down to fields. And when we look at particles and things like that, what exactly are they? If you ask a physicist, some of them will just say, well, we don't know. Others will say maybe it's information or something else. My interpretation of it is most of this is just information and fields and things like that.
Right now, you're just kind of rambling on about something that still doesn't address the topic.
Mm-hmm.
If we just, for the sake of argument, just accept that all of fields in quantum mechanics is actually all information. Let's just throw that out there and just accept it. How do you get from that to a God exists and is conscious?
Okay. Well, the information is so complicated, so sophisticated that it doesn't seem possible at all that any of that would come about through unguided process.
So this is a fallacy.
You look at the cell.
This is yet another version. Hang on. This is yet another version of your argument from personal incredulity. You just can't imagine it. Aaron just asked you, how do you get to even if we grant that it's all information, and we're talking about all that, how do you get to, therefore, there's a thinking agent, God being at the foundation of it? And once again, you've just found another way to say, I can't imagine it's any other way. In this case, almost literally. Do you have a case that is, do you have a case that's an actual evidence-based argument that does not boil down to a fallacy like every other one you've tried to present so far?
Actually, before Marcus answers that, if I could just also address this whole information thing. Do you know that if you open up a container filled with CO2, the CO2 fills the room?
Yeah.
That is an information increase. Where did God get involved? Why was that fine-tuned? That's an information increase on Shannon information theory, and it just falls out from the basics of thermodynamics. Stuff in a container, let go, fills the room. That does not require any grand metaphysics. This is just how states evolve from compressed and to uncompressed. This is, unfortunately, basic physics, and it requires nothing consciousness to create that information. All it did was open the cap on my CO2 container.
Right, but that CO2 information wouldn't include instructions and things like that. But
information is not the same thing as instructions. And that's actually the problem that I was afraid of, that when you hear information, you think actually information that like you can read from a book and telling you how to do things. That is not information. Information is basically just describing, like, say, the position and momentum or the field state. at some particular point in space and time. That does not need to be sophisticated. That does not have to be written in. That does not require instructions.
Ooh, okay, I'll get to that in one, but you wanted me to make a case. Let me make a case real quick. If that's can I do that or no?
We just want to make sure we're starting from premises we agree on, and if they're false premises, we're going to jump right on top of that.
Yeah, and if it's a fallacy,
Okay.
I trust me, Marcus. If you think I sit here every Sunday, eager to go, that's an argument from incredulity. That's an argument from that's not what I want to do. But there's absolutely no way I'm going to let an obviously fallacious argument go unchallenged. And so at each point here where we've asked this question of what makes you think there is a conscious agent God, you've basically used a different statement with almost the same fallacy. And so all we're trying to do is saying, when Aaron's pointing out that information isn't the same as instruction, that it is just, you can view it as raw data, in any quantifiable change in state of the model. So how does that get us to a God as a thinking agent, as the explanation for why that is?
Okay, I'm going to make a case real quick, but first, let me just say one thing real quick. I'm nervous. Okay, this is my first time to the rodeo. This is not your guys' first time to the rodeo. So I'm a little off balance. So if there are some problems in my communication, a lot of it has to do with that. So I apologize, but that's part of the problem that I'm having right now.
So basically, when I said you weren't ready, I was right.
Now, well, yeah, I mean, this is my first time calling in a live-in show.
Cool.
And,
it wasn't meant to be an insult. It wasn't meant to be an insult, but you reflexively just went immediately to that. No, I'm ready. And now you're saying you're not. And it's fine if you're not. Nobody's expecting any caller to have the knowledge that Aaron has. And nobody's expecting any caller to have the experience arguing this that I have. I mean, there's almost nobody who's been arguing this stuff as frequently, as long as I have. That's not the deal. All I want is for you to say, here's why I'm convinced that a thinking agent God is the best explanation for quantum mechanics, for information in fields, for whatever it is that the argument you're making. Just make it.
Okay. So I would put it like this. In the laboratory of the universe, we've seen trillions of experiments. And in those experiments, we've only seen several different things. Only those things. We've only seen that life gives rise to life. We've only seen that consciousness gives rise to consciousness. We've only seen that something gives rise to something. And so looking at that and seeing no evidence at all whatsoever of the contrary, then the best possible explanation to me would be that life gave rise to life, consciousness gave rise to consciousness, and something gave rise to something. Well, how would you do that in a universe that we see right now without defying the laws of logic, reason, common sense, and physics? The only way to do that would be there would have to be an outside intelligent agent.
No. See, here's the problem. You're looking at, you said in the laboratory of the universe, we've done trillions of experiments. And we've only observed several things, that life gives rise to life and that consciousness gives rise to consciousness. I think both of those are false in that not only have we demonstrated the possibility of life arising from non-life in various models of potential abiogenesis, but a sperm and an egg are not conscious, and yet they produce a conscious being if allowed to continue and persist. And so you argued that seeing no evidence to the contrary, the best possible explanation, your abductive argument, is that therefore life gave rise to life and consciousness gave rise to consciousness. The problem is, in the lab of the universe, in these trillions of experiments, how many times have we demonstrated a conscious God?
Well, wait a second. You said possibility.
No. Don't do the wait a second thing. You created this particular model.
Well,
in the lab of the you created this particular model, and I'm asking a question about it. in your lab of the universe, in the trillions of experiences,
And a
how many
argument.
why are you
You gave
fucking
me a
interrupting
fallacious
me?
argument.
Why are you trying to fucking talk over me when I'm just asking you a
That's to me.
question? What are you, why can I not
But
ask
the
you a
same thing you
fucking
did to
question
me.
without you trying to talk over me? Do you want me to mute you? Is that necessary? I have sat here, I am going to mute you. I have sat here and listened and patiently explained over and over again. And when you present your model and I ask one question that exposes the problem with your model, it breaks your brain, and now you have to be a dick to me. Back it up and just answer the question. I don't know is also a valid question or valid answer, but in your lab of the universe, in the trillions of experiences, how many times have we demonstrated that a conscious God exists?
Am I allowed to speak now?
Yes, that's why I asked you a question with an obvious question mark at the end of it. You want to pretend like that wasn't obvious? This is not going to go well for you.
Why
Answer
are
the
you
question.
so involved in it?
Excuse me?
Why are your emotions so involved in it? I don't understand.
My emotions are only involved to the extent that you constantly interrupted me after I exercised patience because you won't answer the one question that I asked you. So I'm going to ask that question again right now, and you're either going to answer it or I will hang up on you. In the lab of universe that you're talking about in your model, in the trillions of experiences, how many times have we demonstrated the existence of an acting agent God?
None, and you wouldn't be able to do that. That would be impossible.
So first of all, you should have just said none. By adding additional information, you now look more ridiculous because now not only are you acknowledging that it hasn't happened, but you're asserting that it can't happen. I'd love to know where you got your knowledge that it cannot be demonstrated, but also you just acknowledged that hasn't happened. In your model, you wanted to eliminate the possibility of life arising from non-life because you don't think it's been demonstrated. I think the possibility and the likelihood has been demonstrated, but let's just assume that it hasn't. If you get to exclude life arising from non-life because it hasn't been demonstrated, then you don't get to include a potential causal explanation that has also never been demonstrated. Do you see the problem in your cherry picking what sort of things you think are impossible that you are including in your model, while there are other things you think are impossible that you're excluding? Do you see the problem in that?
Well, you'd have to explain this to me a little bit. When you say that, have we ever seen life give rise to God?
That's not what I asked. That's not what I asked. I did not in any way say, have we ever seen life give rise to God? You're not even paying attention.
I'm trying.
Okay, then stop talking and listen and answer these yes or no questions. In your lab of the universe, have we ever seen anything other than life give rise to life?
No.
Well, actually, we have. The correct way to phrase the question, have we ever seen life arise from anything other than life?
No.
Okay. So you want to exclude, you in your model want to say that because we haven't observed life arising from non-life, that we should exclude that possibility, right?
Yeah. Well,
cool.
Okay.
No. It's yes or no. It's yes or no. I'm not done. No. It's yes or no. I'm not done. Keep interrupting me. See how well it goes. You don't think that life has been demonstrated derived from anything from life, so we should exclude that possibility. That is fallacious reasoning, and it is a bias where it is fallacious. Would you stop fucking talking? Do I have to mute you? Are you a child? Now, you hung up, so you are a child. Sorry. So let's see if we can get this explanation done here real quick, since Marcus can't handle the heat and had to run away from the fire. If you create a model that says, hey, we've got this universe where we've done trillions of experiences and we've never seen life arise from anything other than life. Well, first of all, I don't know that that's necessarily correct. maybe Aron and I will touch on that in just a second. But the field of science tied to abiogenesis has produced a number of different models and experiments. The Miller-Urey experience, is it Jane Oro and others that have done work in this. We haven't demonstrated how life necessarily arose on Earth, but we have demonstrated that the building blocks of life exist throughout the universe based on data that we have, and that it seems likely and probable that life or that non-living materials could, under the right circumstances, give rise to life. The fact that we haven't demonstrated exactly how it's done is secondary. We don't get to say it cannot happen. In fact, if we live in a universe without some sort of external drive for this, not only can it happen, but it must have happened. So I don't know how you get to just exclude it. But if your model is based on saying, we haven't observed this, so it does not get to be a candidate explanation, then when I point out that your model also has not observed an agent God, and that does not get to be a candidate explanation, your argument is now dead. You have to go back to the drawing board and come up with some different argument, because you biased your model against things that have not been demonstrated while trying to use it to demonstrate something that has not been demonstrated. Aron, is it true that life only comes from life? Or is that just our default kind of assumption that might be wrong?
Well, I'm no biologist, but since I'm a physicist and physics explains everything, therefore I should take complete authority from the physicists or the biologists and chemists who might talk about this. But there actually is interesting physics of life work that has been going on. So, for example, you've heard of Edwin Schrödinger. Has an equation, had a cat. He kind of got sick of where quantum mechanics was going, so started switching into studying biology, and first came up with the idea that there must be some sort of crystal that carries information from one generation to the next, and basically had some of the first predictions of what DNA would be. So that's some physics right there leading to understanding how life works. And perhaps the most interesting stuff going on more recently has been looking at what is called non-equilibrium thermodynamics. Sounds like a fancy thing, but basically when heat is actually flowing, when there's that sort of thermal energy flow going on, what sorts of interesting physics might be happening? Because most of the physics that we study with heat is actually in static cases. But when you actually have things in disequilibrium, what interesting stuff happens there? And apparently one of the things that happens is the systems that actually better get that flow of heat from one place to another become naturally more complex. There seems to actually be an arrow towards complexity when you have systems not in equilibrium. Is there some system in the universe that might not be in equilibrium? I don't know. How about a big ducking sun giving off a huge amount of energy that lands on some other planet that radiates it off? Among other sources of possible heat flows that can drive the complexification of molecules. And that is just some foundational physics that already kind of grounds what's happening there. And if you think this actually breaks the second law of thermodynamics, no, this is actually expected on thermodynamics, getting things to actually complexify for the heat flow. Strangely enough, as it might sound from just the most naive reading of one of the laws of physics, but it's like, nope, this is actually where things seem to be going. And then you got all the other sort of stuff showing like, hey, certain molecules will actually spontaneously grow out in prebiotic solutions. That it looks like actually molecules could even have a level of selection. So you can actually have natural selection even before you have life. I'm no expert in these sorts of things. I am not a researcher in origin of life stuff, but from what I can tell, the people working on it don't think that they just are going to sit on their hands for 50 years and just wonder. They're actually making progress because they're doing the hard work. They're not just saying, I've never seen this before, therefore it couldn't have happened. They say, I haven't seen this before. What could we do in the laboratory to figure it out?
Yeah, I think, so first of all, I'll say one of the things that I've said dozens of times, especially in recent months, pay attention to what questions the caller will not answer. Now, Marcus, hey, first time call, cool. You know, nobody expects any expertise. All I care about is actually honesty. If if somebody honestly says, hey, I'm convinced because the inner witness of the Holy Spirit and what it's done in my life, cool. Do you think somebody else should be convinced for that reason? And if they say no, then I got no beef with them. I'm not going to deny their experience, but I will not necessarily accept their explanation for that experience. I remember one time when I was a kid and we were laying on a trampoline looking up at the moon, and one of the people was like, oh my God, I think I'm high. I think I'm on some kind of drugs because the moon is moving and everything else. And I played along with it. I played along with it. And I remember saying that the moon appeared to be moving, even though it didn't to me, because I didn't want to be excluded from the fun that other people were potentially having. If we actually confirm an abiogenesis model, either through physics, through biology, whatever, if we find evidence to support a particular abiogenesis model being not just plausible as a way that life might arise, but even more so that it may be the correct explanation for how it arose here, then anyone who started with premise 1, life can only come from life, is wrong. And they have, without warrant, excluded the right answer. This is something you got to think of. When you're constructing a syllogism and you're creating your argument, you want premises that are true, and you want them to be supported by evidence so that they are accepted. Because the primary thing isn't whether or not they're true. We may not have access to truth. It is whether or not you accept the premise. And so if you accept the premise that life can only come from life, and it turns out you're wrong, then you've accepted a flawed premise. And every argument you build on that flawed premise, or that every argument that includes that flawed premise, is also a flawed argument. Does not mean the conclusion is false. It means we can't know whether or not the conclusion is true. You don't get to declare something is true in order to dismiss its contrary. Similarly, Marcus or anybody else might be frustrated because I could take that argument that he presented and flip it on its head to say that in the lab of the universe, in the trillions of experiments that we've done, at no point has anyone demonstrated that a God exists. Therefore, God doesn't exist. You could add a step in between there, and the argument would still be just as fallacious if I'm using it to prove that a God doesn't exist than it would be as it would be when somebody's trying to use it to prove that a God does exist. If you think that, hey, I used to be an atheist, used to be a non-believer, and something about science convinced me that a God, cool, I'm in, let's hear it. But if it is, first of all, no offense to Aaron, outside of Aaron and maybe one or two other people, I'm so exhausted listening to people talk about quantum mechanics. I could puke. It's not even, it is like, it's become the kind of fad thing of, oh, if I want to sound like I know what I'm talking about, if I want to sound like I'm science-minded, I'll use this thing that almost nobody understands, and I'll use it in a way where it it's difficult for me to spot the problem with it. And by the way, I'm not suggesting that Marcus sat down and tried to construct something dishonestly. I think Marcus is honest and confused about the reality of this. But yeah, you don't just get to say, premise 1, life must come from life. By the way, let's assume that was true. Life in that context, life in the context that Marcus is talking about it, is specifically biological life on Earth in the current presentation of our universe. Does God count as biological life on Earth in our current presentation of the universe? If not, then he can't be used as the source of life, because if you're going to say that biological life in the current presentation of our universe on Earth only comes from other biological life in the current presentation of our universe on Earth, then you have also excluded God, the very thing. Your argument is flawed in like 12 different ways. That might be a slight exaggeration.
I
I'll
was
have to come up
actually
with a couple.
thinking a similar thing when he was talking about consciousness and quantum mechanics, because I was thinking, if we kept going down the road that we ended up not going, that somehow quantum mechanics gives rise to consciousness, then doesn't that suggest that if God is conscious, he is also composed of quantum fields and he's physical?
Yeah, it is. It is a curiosity where it's like, I'd love to find a way to demonstrate. I'd love to demonstrate any of this. If in fact there's good reason to think there's a God, it's not like I don't want to know. And it's not like I wouldn't still be opposed if he turned out to be a monster. I believe there are kings. I just don't think there should be kings. And I don't think we should be granting them, particular power or authority. I, pull out some Monty Python
Unless
quotes
they have a
about,
big ducking dragon. Then they get all the
Yes.
authority they want. That's just
until we
science.
kill that dragon. And then it's all about us. Here we go. We got a couple other callers already queued up and ready to go. Jeff is an atheist in Ohio, pronouns are he, him, has a question or comment about tuning our threshold for evidence. So welcome, Jeff. You're on with Aaron and Matt.
All right. Thanks a lot, guys. Yeah, so I guess the bare question is, can we tune our evidentiary threshold? And I'm being careful not to say choose, because I don't think that makes any sense, but I'm wondering, can we maybe choose experiences and exposure ourselves to things that condition our mind the way we think in such a way that it changes our evidentiary threshold, and maybe optimizes it to the effect that we believe more true things and disbelieve more false things?
So I have to say, because I work as my day job as a data scientist, and I'm thinking about this in terms of model sensitivity versus selectivity, precision, recall, those sorts of measures. And where do you set the threshold for
exactly.
whether, like, if you're doing just like binary classification, it's this thing or it's not that thing.
Yeah.
And let's actually put it into a little bit more strict terms. How about a medical test? You go in for a test to see if you have blood cancer. Clearly, you want a test that if you have the disease to tell you you got it. But every test is imperfect. At some point, you have to have some level of tolerance of uncertainty with said test. Will never be perfect. And I guess the question is, where do we set the threshold so that way we're not telling too many people they have blood cancer and they need to start treatment, and of course not having it so lax in its detective abilities that it lets most people get screened, think they're fine, and then all of a sudden 6 months later they're suffering from symptoms. And in many ways that is a bit of a value judgment, because, well, what in a sense costs more? This is not easy to answer. What costs more, a missed detection of blood cancer or over prescribing people to get treatment for blood cancer they don't have? That is not, at least in the abstract, easy to answer. And I guess we'd have some way of saying,
I'll just say, Aaron,
what's more
that,
costly to a person.
Yeah. So I have the same background, at least, like machine learning and computational mechanics is sort of where I'm coming from. And I was immediately thinking about binary classification as well, and this idea of tuning a hyperparameter, saying, how much confidence optimizes my desired metric, But in that sort of case where we're looking as observers from the outside, we can choose a threshold. What I'm thinking about is threshold for belief. I either believe something or I don't. And there's maybe some amount of evidence that would change my mind one way or the other. But I don't get to choose what that evidence is and how much evidence is sufficient. Although I do believe that threshold is determined by my biology and my experience. And so I'm wondering, if I have a threshold that's too high, for example, then I'm going to disbelieve a lot of true things. If I have a threshold that's too low, I'm going to believe a lot of false things. Are there ways that we can change ourselves by choosing experiences that help us to learn a better evidentiary threshold? Are there ways that we can tune it? And it's not necessarily a conscious choice of, I'm going to believe this thing if it hits X, Y, or Z value. It's just why do I intuit belief one way or the other, and how do I change the amount of evidence that would be necessary for me to do so? You know,
Yeah.
as an
Well, I
example,
think,
I hear a lot of people call
if I
in
can, I think
and they
actually
say
there's
testimony
something
is
right
enough for them, you know?
like from the same area that we come from here. I think actually the answer is don't do a binary classification, do a probability that you're in a certain set. So instead of
Yes.
not or am, what probability is it? So that you can also talk about how well calibrated it is. So for example, suppose I look at the evidence and I'm 55% confident that it's true. Beliefs like that should be true more often than not, but just a little bit. That would be if I have like a perfectly calibrated brain model. Do I have that? Am I going and collecting the evidence for that? I'm pretty sure my wife would be a bit worried if I started listing out all my beliefs and probabilities and trying to graph out exactly how calibrated every single one of my
Right.
beliefs are. But in general, we can say, hey,
Right.
when it comes to the things I believe things based on the strength of the evidence. If the evidence is weak, I only weakly believe the thing. If the evidence is strong, I strongly believe the thing.
Right.
So we have, I heard there's an election coming up. You might have some probability of who is going to win that. And if your model is well calibrated, somehow, I guess if we could repeat this election a million times and the election cycle feels like it's lasting that long, but nonetheless, if you have a good model that you would say you have 55% confidence person X is going to win, somehow if we could repeat that a million times and see like 55% of the time it comes out as you were expecting, and then the other 45% the opposite. And it's just a matter of, hey, sometimes we just don't have good evidence one way or the other, and we just have to say, I think it's kind of this, but I'm wishy-washy, versus, holy crap, we got this giant mountain of evidence, so clearly I'm going to be believing that, and not believing that is absurd. When you treat it that way and realize what skepticism is basically believe the thing that's more than 50% likely, but also say, hey, there's still at least like a 49% chance that this is not true, so don't hang your hat on it, just say, this is where I'm leaning, but it won't take much to change my mind.
Yeah. There's sort of like 2 degrees of freedom, because believe something is 50% likely. That's an internal model, right? That's not something external. And people, they hear testimony and they go from somebody they care about. Their mom tells them, I saw a ghost, and they go, well, 95% certain there's ghosts exist. My mom saw one. You know what I mean? So
actually,
the question is, like, how do we change those internal? Yeah.
The thing is, though, if
sorry, say it again.
Person, we actually do have external ways of checking this. So if you're 50-50 on something, well, take all the beliefs that you're 50-50 on. Half of them will be right, half of them will be wrong, if it's a well-calibrated mental model. So that's the way of externalizing that. And with what you mentioned with testimony, well, you can say, hey, there are lots of people who claim they've seen ghosts. Every single time we've tested that out, it's come back null. So that's a pretty good reason to not initially take much evidentiary value of another person claiming it's a ghost, because every time we've checked, they've been wrong, or we haven't been able to verify it.
Right. So I agree with that. My question is concerning the individual that believes otherwise, because they don't get to choose whether or not they believe their mom's testimony. They either do or they don't. Right. So the question is, what is it? What can they do to change their internal model of belief? Like, what experiences can they seek out? Because it's not as though they can step outside of themselves and then choose differently. They just believe or they don't believe.
What's the purpose of asking that? Like, what can they do? So it almost sounds like you're saying they want to change their criteria for accepting things. What can they do? Well, one is why would somebody want to change their criteria for accepting things? And the correct answer could be, they find that their criteria isn't good enough, and they keep believing things that are, they have to change their mind again because they've, demonstrably false or dubious. But somebody in chat was asking, hey, Matt, are you saying that people can't change their criteria? Yeah, but I don't think they do it as a simple matter of choice. You are either convinced of something or you're not. But the criteria under which you become convinced of something can change. And one of the ways it changes is by you becoming convinced that there's a better set of criteria. It's the reason why, you know, once upon a time we might have done everything by tea leaves, and then we found, ooh, that's dubious. And since those of us who care about whether or not something's true, we're going to say, whatever convinced me to believe that wasn't good enough. So now I need to have a better way to do that. And so we then go out and we find what we think is a better way. We become convinced of a new criteria, new standards. It could be that new criteria and standards are worse than the old ones, and we just aren't aware of it because it's producing good results. It's like if you found out your calculator was broken, you threw it down, you picked up another calculator and you put in 2 times 3, press equal, and you got 6, and you're like, I've got a better calculator. You don't know that calculator could be broken for every calculation except that one. You might have had a more functional calculator prior. And so it's this constant process of, I want to understand reality, so I'm going to constantly modify the criteria that I'm willing to accept or consider, and the waiting for them. But I don't know that any of it's is a simple choice. Like, I'm just going to accept.
I agree.
Things.
I don't think it's a.
Yeah, I'm saying even if I found out things like, you know, understanding the concept of falsifiability, that in principle something isn't testable if it's not falsifiable. Falsifiability being the capacity to be demonstrated to be false. When you say something like, there are no black swans, that is falsifiable, because if you find a black swan, you have demonstrated that that's not a correct statement. What convinced me that falsifiability should be a part of my model? Was it a choice? Did I just go, yeah, I'll just go with falsifiability? I think it was, I became convinced of the value of falsifiability by having demonstrations of what it excludes and includes. And that's what justified or convinced me to use it.
Right. So that's along those lines is what I'm thinking. And I started thinking about this earlier when you guys mentioned education. And so not necessarily an individual seeking to better themselves, but how can we help one another to have, you know, the best evidentiary threshold that best agrees with the evidence or best agrees with reality and leads us to the most right conclusions. Like how do you teach that? What experiences do you give your students that help them, that demonstrate this is a good evidentiary threshold and this is not? Again, it's not that they get to choose that, but they need to have the experiences that allow them to internalize those observations in such a way that it changes their thresholds.
I think part of it is that you actually need to not just teach people facts, you need to actually inculcate certain virtues, and in particular, curiosity. If you are curious and you want to actually go and explore those things, you will find out, hey, here are some things I was wrong about, or things that change how much I weigh this other testimony.
Right.
If you are a curious person, you will be willing to explore these things and discover things you didn't know and change your mind about things. It's when we fail to inculcate curiosity and make people stick in their ways, that's when things become harder to make people then adjust and actually make their minds fit the evidence. If their mission is, hey, this is what I believe, and I'm going to make sure the facts fit what I think, then curiosity is dead in that person. Yeah. But if you could spark curiosity, I think that will motivate them to get closer to the truth.
Yeah. Okay. Well, just something to think about. Thanks so much for your time, guys. Appreciate it.
Sweet. Thanks, Jeff.
All right.
Got a couple more callers here coming in from the Atheist thing. By the way, the lines are still open. If there are theistic callers, they're always going to have priority because, you know, while we're happy to talk to people who agree with us on things, it's not always as fun, and I don't think it's always as productive. So we've still got lines open for theists. As a reminder, upcoming this week on the line, there's a Sunday show after dark later tonight with myself and Paulogia at 7 p.m. Central. Monday's Skeptalk's going to be John Gleason and Aron Ra. Tuesday's Chewed Gum is Eve and Alyssa. Wednesday on the Hang Up, I'm back, and I believe Andrew Seidel will be here. On Thursday's Translating Collins show, it's Josie Caballero and Luxander. And then next Sunday on this very show, Jimmy Snow and Eve will be doing the early show. and I'll be doing the late show with Eric from Skeptics and Scoundrels. We have.
I thought the Late Show was
Frank
done by Stephen
Cullen.
Colbert.
I'm sorry, what?
Hello.
I thought the Late Show was done by Stephen Colbert.
So yes, Sunday show after dark. I guess I should call things by the right name. Frank's calling from North Carolina. Pronto him. And any conscious being is a passive observer of reality. That's an interesting thing. What the hell are you talking about, Frank? Clue me in.
Well, first I want to say I understand quantum mechanics, and I can use it to prove the existence of two gods, and they're in superposition. No, I'm just kidding. Sorry.
Don't you dare observe it. You'll collapse
Actually,
one of the gods.
I'm an atheist, and I was raised a fundamentalist Christian, and luckily I had some very patient teachers in school that helped me learn critical thinking and escape that crap. And so I've tried to use critical thinking to sort things out, and it's led me to some interesting, conflicts with my family, as you might imagine. But one of the things that's led me to is a realization that free will is a fantasy. There's no way the criteria for free will can be met. I want to, as part of what I'm going to try to talk about, I want to take that as an assumption. If we want to talk about that, I think you agree with me. I know you have talked about compatibilism, but I think you agree that ultimately that doesn't really meet the free will criteria that the common sense free will notion. And I'd like to take it as an assumption, if it's okay, that free will is not a thing. It's impossible. And then the second thing is perhaps more controversial, and that has to do with the nature of consciousness. When I try to examine consciousness, it seems to me that the only way you can examine it is from a first person's perspective. All that I have available to me are experiences. They're three basic categories: thoughts, sensations, and feelings. It seems to me that everything that impinges upon my reality is one of those three things, or some combination thereof. And so when you think about those things together, and the other thing that's really important for me that seems to be the case logically, and I'm happy to be talked out of this because it doesn't produce an ultimate reality that I'm perfectly thrilled with, but the idea that all experience is ultimately input. Thoughts impinge upon me, sensations impinge on my consciousness, and feelings impinge. So it's basically all input. And ultimately, if you put all of that together, it's clear that I'm not ultimately the ultimate origin of any of that. Certainly, I have the impression of agency. I have the impression of doing things. I have the impression of I'm making choices. But all of that is constructed of thoughts, feelings, and experiences, all of which impinge on me and are ultimately input. And so the ultimate, seems to me, conclusion of that is, as a conscious agent, as a conscious subject, I am ultimately a passive observer of all of that, a passive receiver of all of that.
Okay.
So that's the basic argument.
So let's say there's three people in my living room. One of them is me, functioning exactly as I am right now. One of them is Arden, who's asleep and unconscious on the couch. And the other one is someone who suffered a terrible injury and is basically experiencing locked-in syndrome, where they are consciously aware of what's going on, but unable to act. Do you think it'd be fair to say that all three of those people are passive observers, equally passive in the same way?
Yes. They're all having
Wow.
completely different experiences, but they're all having experiences. They're all having either thoughts, feelings, or sensations, all of which are ultimately input.
Okay. I don't know how to respond to that, because I find it absurd to think that all three of those people are equally passive in their state of observing. One of them literally can't act at all. One of them isn't acting because they are asleep and potentially unconscious. And the other one is in a normal conscious state. I don't know how anybody can refer to all three of them and say, yep, they're all passive observers. Yeah, what's the
The
difference
argument is that
between
they're
the
not,
what's
that
what's the
nobody's really,
difference but what's the difference between the person who's suffering from locked-in syndrome and me who's not?
it's the experiences that are impinging on your consciousness. Basically, you have the experience of being an active agent doing things. That person has the experience of not being an active agent, but it's both having experiences that are impinging upon consciousness.
And the difference between someone who's experiencing being an active agent and someone who's not, and yet you say they're both equally passive.
Yes, it's all passive, is what I'm saying. In other words, the
To me, that
experiences are
absolute
impinging.
nonsense.
I mean,
When I asked what's the difference, you noted that one of them has the experience of being an active observer, and the other one doesn't. So how can they both be equally passive if they have if one of them has the experience and capability to be an active observer, and the other one is sitting there with locked-in syndrome saying, I desperately want to scream right now, but I cannot?
It's an impression. It's not, I didn't mean that the person is actually active. They have the impression of being active. They have the experience of being an active person by virtue of the experiences that are impinging on their consciousness, but they're not actually active. They're only experiencing the perception of activity.
Okay.
It sure seems, though, that if
I was just going to say, what would make someone
like,
truly an active observer? Because you just ruled out the only active observers, and you're basically saying they're equivalent to people who would be considered a passive observer. So what would make someone an active observer?
There is no, of course, I'm happy to be reasoned out of it, but what I'm saying is the nature of consciousness suggests to me that there is no such thing.
That's not what I asked.
Impossible?
I'm sorry, both of you said something.
I'll stop. Aaron's got questions that touch on the same thing.
It's basically continuing with what Matt is saying, that is it even possible to describe an active observer, or are you saying that's like logically impossible?
From a standpoint of a conscious agent, I'm trying to imagine how that it can be anything other than experiences impinging upon consciousness, and so therefore that a conscious agent, a conscious person or conscious entity is ultimately just a receiver of experiences, and so can't ultimately claim to be the origin of those experiences, and so can't claim to be, in a sense, in a real sense, active, as opposed to just being a receptacle of experience, basically.
I feel like I need to not even restate, but just repeat my question. Is an active observer even possible?
As I understand it, a conscious active observer would not be possible.
All right. This seems like a pretty constrained view of consciousness, then, if it's not even conceivable to be that. And it sure seems like that actually breaks away from the common sense idea that, as the example earlier from Matt, he's wide awake and he's doing what he wants to do, versus a person who's asleep or a person who is locked in and can't even blink their eyes. Let me actually also give a different example of things. So when I think of a conscious person, a person who's like really aware of things, they're also like aware of their own perceptions, their own thoughts, and have what to us looks like a sense of self-control. And I would say that because have you ever said something that you regretted saying?
Yes. Hmm?
And would you say you're more likely to say or do something you regret doing after maybe a few too many drinks, for example?
That's my impression.
I would agree as well. So to me, it looks like, hey, there can be a degree of self-control based on a number of different factors. I mentioned alcohol here, but also that, hey, adults seem to have more of what looks like self-control than children do. People who are not angry or who are not like enraged have more self-control than people who are calm, and so on. So it seems like to me there is some degree of that sort of self-control, and that is what we could refer to as free will. It's not the contra-causal break the laws of physics free will, but it's the sort of free will that we kind of care about when it comes to actually what decisions we do and don't make, and that some people have more of it or less of it than others, depending on their circumstances.
I would agree that that's a reasonable impression. The point I'm making is really more fundamental, that I'm trying to figure out how experiences can be anything other than input. In other words, the experience that I have of feeling like I should have done something different, or feeling like I could do.
What difference does it make
Feeling
whether
like
it
I
can be
could
anything
do
other
something.
than input? The fact is that there's sensory information that comes in and is processed by my brain. What difference does that make? Why does that make it so that nobody's an active observer?
Well, but you're making, of course, I mean, this is going to sound silly, but you're making a basic assumption there that
I didn't make any assumption. I
that,
literally asked a question.
No, you did make you made an assumption that there is a physical brain involved.
No, sir, I didn't fucking make any assumption. I asked you a question. And my question in no way is contingent on whether there's a physical brain involved. I don't give a shit if it's a non-physical brain. My question did not make an assumption at all. All right, I give up. I no longer care, Frank.
I'm willing to do a little bit more. So, Frank, I think I do have an example of non-input awareness. I'm aware of my own thoughts. I can think about what I'm thinking or what I'm feeling. That's internal. I can reflect back on my own memories. That's internal. So we're not just the outputs of stuff outside of our brains. There's also stuff going inside of our head, being aware of what's going inside of our head to at least a small degree. To use like Freudian psychology, things like the ego versus the id, for example.
But when you think about it from the standpoint of your perspective as a subject of experience, those internal thoughts are still just thoughts impinging on consciousness. They come to consciousness from somewhere. Your thoughts come from somewhere. The sensations come from somewhere. The feelings come from somewhere. None of which you're the ultimate author of. That's it. And so you just
asserted that.
The impression
you just asserted that. You just asserted that with no demonstration that that's actually the truth. You just asserted that basically what Aron described is wrong and impossible. What's the justification for that?
No.
Yes.
I'm not saying that it's impossible. What I'm saying.
He literally described what appears to be internal thoughts being processed, and you said you're not the author of those thoughts. Prove it.
What I'm saying is, you're as a subject of consciousness. As you think of it only as a subject of consciousness. Don't make any assumptions about what is possibly creating the consciousness. Think about as a subject of
You're the one that is
all you are
asserting
aware of
about
are
what is or
thoughts.
isn't creating the consciousness. This is bordering on incredibly dishonest, because he gave you
And it's
examples.
worth, yeah, and Frank, the whole thing of what I mentioned earlier with metacognition, literally thinking about your own thinking, that is where the consciousness and object can become, or sorry, that the subject consciousness can become the object of the consciousness itself. I'm thinking about what I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about how I'm going to respond to you. I'm thinking about arguments I could be having. I have those arguments too often in the shower where I think I win. We think about our thoughts all the time. We think, hey, am I actually thinking this through correctly? That is pretty normal in the human experience, at least for adults. And we even use that with children that we call learning, have the kids actually think about why they think the things that they do and have them grow up and change the way that they're doing thinking. That is internal. For you to claim what you're doing, Frank, you basically have to throw out the entirety of metacognition, which is a big chunk of psychology.
All right. Well, thank you. I'll think about that. I'll think about what you said. I appreciate it.
You're thinking about your thinking. You've already advanced.
Maybe you'll figure out that those
right.
are internally spawned, that nothing external is actually causing, producing, or encouraging any of the thoughts that you have about your thoughts.
I fear
Right,
we're
thank
2
you.
long hits away from navel gazing.
They're reaching a point where it's like, dude, but we're just processing information and we're not. Yes, I get it. But when you say that the person who's suffering from locked-in syndrome and the person who's not are equally passive, we got a problem. If you want to say that we're all passive at some sense and that we don't, it's like the people who try to say, oh, I don't have free will because I can't, I really want to fly when I flap my arms, and the facts of reality prevent that, therefore it's imposing upon my free will. That's a different aspect about will and limitations on it. That's about limitations on your ability to fulfill your desire, not whether or not you are able to have the desire and whether or not you are able to act upon that desire in an attempt. It's like, I really want to win the lottery, but every ticket I buy is a failure. That nothing stopped you from buying a ticket or wanting to buy a ticket. All right, we got a couple calls left here. And as always, we're going to prioritize theistic calls. So Danny's calling from California. Pronouns are he, him, with a question about, is there something that never had a beginning? How we want to address that, Danny? You're on with Aron and Matt.
Well, it has to do with, if anything has totally existed, like if this world has always existed and we have no idea, that means it didn't come from nowhere. And that means it has no age limit, like you can't go back in time and change how long it exists, and you can't go forward in time to any amount to change that either. It doesn't get any older, it doesn't get any younger either way. So it's defeated the purpose of time.
I apologize.
I'm confused
Danny.
by the statement that you're not going forward in time, because I feel like I'm doing a pretty good job going forward in time right now.
Yeah. But is time on your side or is it against you?
I don't know what you mean. Is this like a Rolling Stones song? Time is on my side. I don't know what that means.
Okay, well, if you don't believe, because you're either an atheist or an agnostic, it kind of sounds like you're an agnostic, but
Danny, please,
you want
Danny,
to be convinced.
Please, Danny, please don't try to assess what I am, because already you don't seem to understand atheism, agnosticism, etc. You called in to ask, is there something that never had a beginning? My answer is, I don't know. Do you think there's something that never had a beginning?
Yeah, I do believe that. Yeah,
What is it? What is it? And
yeah.
why are
There's
you
some that.
convinced? What is it that never had a beginning? And why are you convinced that it exists and never had a beginning?
Well, that would be God, you know,
So you
because
think that
my
there's something
mind's so
called
small.
God. So you think there's something called God that never had a beginning. What is your evidence that this
Yeah,
God exists and that it never had a beginning?
for the simple fact that there is just too many things beyond my imagination to see why we even exist. And if you don't believe that there's a God that exists, because we do have laws that we go by, then what is the sense in having good morals if you don't believe it?
Okay. I'm going to handle this really, really quickly, Danny. The sense of having good morals, the reason for having good morals is because we care about well-being, our own well-being and other people's well-being. And so having actions that are consistent with improving and increasing well-being is something that we all benefit from. That answers your question about why be moral in the absence of belief in a God, because it actually benefits us. Literally everything you said before that, when I said, what is your justification that there is a God that doesn't have a beginning, was nonsensical. You said there's just too many things that are beyond my imagination to see why we even exist. And then you talked about laws. None of that is an argument for the existence of God. Is none of it is evidence for the existence of God. None of it is an argument for the existence of God not having a beginning or anything like that. So when I asked, what evidence do you have that there's a God and that it didn't have a beginning, you provided a whole bunch of nothing and then asked, why be moral? So have I at least addressed your question on why be moral?
No, really, you haven't, but can I ask
Okay.
you something?
Okay. Let's assume, Danny, that you and I live in a world where there is no God. Do you think that it would be
Yeah.
wise for us to behave in ways that we would identify as morally superior? Like, let's not kill each other. Do you think that us deciding that we're not going to kill each other benefits us?
No, I don't believe it does.
Okay.
I guess,
I
Danny,
mean,
So
that
can
makes
I
it
ask
sound
you
like that if
something?
literally God told you not, if God was not there to tell you not to kill, you would just go around killing, and you think everyone would do exactly the same. No one would think, hey, us killing each other makes things kind of suck. Maybe we should prevent that.
I probably would do something very outrageous.
okay,
There's
I'm
a
going to
lot
let
of
you
things
go.
that are pretty
Danny,
disturbing.
I'm going to let you go.
What?
You don't need to call me. You don't need to call me back. You need to do some thinking about how you respond to very simple
Yeah.
explanations. Because when I ask you if you and I are the only people here on earth and we decide that it's better for us to not kill each other and you don't think that benefits us, which one of us is going to die in your scenario? Are you going to kill me or am I going to kill you? And how does that benefit us with one killing the other? You need to go off and think about
It
that.
gives you.
Because no, I wasn't asking you to answer right now. You're not going to say anything else on this show. You need to go off and think about how why on earth you could look at a scenario where two people have agreed that it's in their best interest not to kill each other, and that you could look at that scenario and say, nope, that does not benefit them, because that is beyond ridiculous and it's not deserving of any more airtime on the show. Thanks for calling. It's unfortunate that one of the only theistic callers we get is unable to see the advantage of not killing each other.
Yeah, I guess if you have no value, then you don't see life being nasty, brutish, and short to be a problem.
Just wild. Here's a couple difficult questions. Eugene in Georgia, pronounce he, him, wants to talk to us about staying skeptical without becoming cynical. Good luck, Eugene.
Hello, guys.
Yeah, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Yeah, it's a it's not a broad spectrum question. Like, I think cynical people have a problem. It's a personal problem. And I'm scared to dibble dabble in things that I really don't have proof of in my head, but feel good. So I kind of like avoid it and don't want to like do hypotheticals of like, where did the universe start? It can be not that lame, but like it's starting to bleed into everything in my life. It's something I've been dealing with for a long time. I really like math because there's kind of, some absolute answers there. So I can, if someone asks me what the answer is, I don't have any problem giving the answer. And then I'm asking for like maybe some advice on you guys. But one maybe other caveat is that when I was younger, my brother explained to me the Dunning-Kruger effect, and he really focused on in that study, the professional, how he went into that test and after the test, what he said. But he never told me what he thought, which one I was. And after he told me that, I spent the next 10 years of my life thinking I was the one that thought he knew more than he actually knew. And I was talking to a therapist, and they brought up the topic, and he said, well, probably your brother was more along the lines that you're on the side of where you doubt yourself too much. And he probably didn't know if he could have that conversation with you because there's brother tensions, and he thought maybe that would be a fight or something. But that's just something else I deal with, is I always doubt if my thinking is sound.
So when it comes to the Dunning-Kruger effect, the flip side of it is actually the people who are like the absolute experts on a topic tend to actually underestimate their knowledge or their skills and that sort of thing. But of course, that's such a small class of people for a particularly small subject that it's not the thing that usually gets studied and talked about. It's mostly that it's worth noting the Dunning-Kruger effect is a general sort of thing. So I overestimate in the sorts of things that I just don't have that much knowledge of at all. And the very few things that I'm probably not overestimating myself on are the things that I've studied very deeply and become expert on. It's an issue that, in general, on most things, we're not the expert. And so what we think we know about it, we're probably not realizing all the other nuances, the important things that would make us realize, oh, I don't understand this subject well enough yet to have have the level of confidence I think I have, that I feel I have, and I really shouldn't, because I don't even know all the things I don't know about that would make me go and realize, oh, that's not right, or oh, that's an important nuance. I definitely, of course, can't tell you what exactly was going on with your brother in particular, and I definitely don't want to be imposing into your therapy sessions. But it's probably the case that there are things that you are like the expert on, and you doubting yourself is hyper skeptical. That no, this is something that you're the expert on. You know what it's going to be. Whether I don't know a particular thing, but for example, a plumber that has 30 years of experience, they're going to know what's going on way more than the average person. And if they're full of self-doubt, that's probably a bit hyperbolic on their part. It's like, no, you've been doing this work for 30 years. You know why my pipes are broken. Please help me.
Yeah, I get that. I was kind of using that to maybe for an understanding of where my mind is with myself, and maybe that was just something that was bleeding over to my cynicalism. But it seems like Matt seems that he's telling me good luck on not becoming too cynical.
No.
So
let me back up.
Right.
Skepticism doesn't lead to cynicism. It's something else that leads to cynicism. Skepticism just means I want to believe as many true things and as few false things as possible. I want to use the best mechanisms that I can find to make sure that my internal model of reality matches reality as best I can. Skepticism is not cynicism, and skepticism is a cure for cynicism, because as soon as you find yourself in a position where you appear to be cynical, if you evaluate the warrant for that cynicism skeptically, it's either warranted, because there are things that's probably warranted to be cynical about. It's either warranted and within the bounds of skepticism, or the skepticism will erode it. the thing that you seem to be asking about, which everybody struggles with, is I look around the world. I'll go back to the same statistic I've used a bunch of times. 49% of people think that unemployment was at a 30-year high when it was actually at a 30-year low. It's difficult to avoid become cynical about how stupid we are and how ill-informed we are and how ill-equipped we are to figure out what the truth is when you have evidence that supports it. But what we're really doing in that scenario, our cynicism, is taking a specific set of data and expanding it and making a prediction about a larger population set, a larger period of time. And that's the part that may not be warranted. It might be. It could be the case that humanity is doomed and stupid and that there's nothing we can do about it. But that's not, if it turns out that it's a warranted case to believe that, it's no longer cynicism, it's realism. And so the fact, when I was kind of half joking when I said good luck, because all of us are going to reach conclusions that are not completely warranted by the evidence, no matter how much we try to be the best skeptic. And also, all of us are going to reach conclusions that are ultimately negative and give us a negative view of the world that it's maybe tempting to identify as cynical, when in fact it's realistic. Is it cynical for me to think that I have a terminal illness when I actually have a terminal illness? Of course not. That's reality. It's just that nobody likes to think about, oh, yeah, I'm going to die someday. And so when we see the consequences of misinformation and how it's not changing minds, we take that evidence of these people were presented with solid information that any reasonable person should accept, and they didn't, which means they're unreasonable, which means they're also going to fall for this, and this. And it means that they're going to vote this way, and that's going to lead to the destruction of everything, and the whole world's going to fall apart, and it's going to hell in a handbasket. Just don't go down the slippery slope. Confine your assessment to the situation at hand and the evidence available. And those cynical, quasi-realistic assessments are going to be temptations that arise all day, every day. And it's fine to entertain them. Let me hit this last little point and then I'll stop. About the thing that we're not talking about right now, there were a bunch of people on all sides of the issue who were creating conspiracy theories. And when I would point this out, they'd be like, I'm just entertaining the possibility that, X happened or Y happened. At no point would I or any skeptic say that there's a problem with entertaining a possibility. But if you're sitting there entertaining the possibility that an event didn't happen or didn't happen the way we perceived it or whatever else, that's fine until you go out and publicly claim that this is the case. And now you are spreading information that isn't warranted. You can consider anything you want. It's when you start accepting it and then promoting it that you might be delving into cynicism. Like, for example, I said yesterday, and we're not going to talk about any detail, I said yesterday that what happened may have sewn up the election for Trump. That is my take on where we stand as an assessment. I'm not saying this is definitely going to happen. I didn't make any absolutes, nothing. This is kind of what I suspect is the current state of affairs. And I hope I'm wrong. But it wasn't cynical. It was, given what I've seen in the past and making predictions about the future, this is the best inductive case I can make for what our actual political state of affairs is right now. And I, could be wrong, hope I'm wrong. But does that make sense, Eugene?
It does. I feel like I used the wrong definition, and I shouldn't use cynicism. I don't know what word I should have used. I don't think I just expressed myself, but basically, I'm doubtful. Like, I can't even, a conspiracy theory, I don't entertain. A conspiracy that we can look at the facts and talk about, I will. And I feel like, and there's a lot of times in my life that, like, I doubt presenting what I know, even though I know it. Like, I double checked and everything else, but and I see you I see people, similar platforms, and they do it, and like when I do it, I don't know, maybe it's my ego. Maybe I never thought about that. Maybe my ego is worried about being wrong is why I don't. But I'm just trying to manage how, because I always concerned that I might not grasp the whole thing. And then when it comes down to it, when I share it with someone, they're like, yeah, that was really good. And your thought on that's really good. And until that point, I'm like, my anxiety level's through the roof. And I feel like I am just a regular person that shouldn't have an opinion on any matter. But you were able to hypothetical about the possibility of this might seal the deal for Trump, where I would be scared to even think that, because I'd be scared that I was going to go down some kind of rabbit hole and get mislead and then just see information I like and dive into it and lose my skeptic ability to read this information. Now, maybe I just talked around in a circle.
No. Here's the thing, Eugene, and I apologize because we got to wrap stuff up. We got one more call to make, and I don't want to leave you hanging. There are some people who don't have the ability to think in hypotheticals and abstractions. For whatever reason, it's uncomfortable for them, or it leads to side thoughts, or your brain goes down a bunch of rabbit holes. If entertaining a hypothetical, if you know that to be the sort of thing that kind of leads you astray and increases your anxiety, which spirals into, let me figure out the worst, and then you start obsessing over it, then it's probably better if you develop a mechanism. First of all, don't forget about the Secular Therapy Project. They can be helpful with that. But it's probably better if you develop some mechanism that says, I'm engaging in a hypothetical. I'm aware of this right now. And therefore, I need to either get off of this hypothetical and focus on other things because I know I'm just going to sit here and go in circles for a while. Or I need to, at every point where that hypothetical leads me to something else, I need to say, hang on, this was part of this hypothetical. Hang on, this to kind of, I had a friend who, if we were in a conversation and either one of us would head off down an irrelevant rabbit trail, one of us would look at the other and just say, Bobcat. And Bobcat was the word that was like, you are no longer talking about the same subject we started talking about. I'm not sure if you're aware about that. Let's get us back on track. You need a Bobcat that you can use on yourself, Eugene.
Thank you. I'll let you guys go.
And yeah. All right.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
Yes.
What was that, Aaron?
Bye.
Oh, I was going to say, I think I also have this sort of, I think I know how Eugene feels, because let me just give an example. Remember back in 2011 when the end of the world was supposed to happen, according to Harold Camping? Now, fortunately, I was never a fundamentalist. I never, thought much of the rapture or anything like that. And when the time alleged for the 2011 stuff was coming up, I knew it was bull crap. I was an atheist. This was not an issue. And yet, because I was still thinking of the hypothesis and the fact it was not zero probability, I could feel inside of me just a tiny twinge, more twinge than deserved, of being worried about this being, what would be the outcome if this were actually true? Even if the chances of 1 in a trillion, well, it's like, 1 in a trillion of a really terrible, shitty thing. Oh, goodness, it's still enough for my brain because it can't calculate that small. So I can know what that feels like. Something like I say, hey, I know this is almost absolutely not true, but it still can worry me just because I can't calculate it down to how infinitesimal it really should be affecting me.
My apologies. I'm going to put this caller live, and I'm going to slip off for just a few seconds here and let Aaron get started. Bill in New York's an atheist. Pronouns are he, him, that wants to talk about Pascal's wager a little bit. Bill, you're on the air.
Hey, how you doing, guys?
Doing all right.
Oh, okay.
All right.
Well, no, I had pasted something on my Facebook page. 2 words to say that God's real, and somebody came back with Pascal's wager. And I put them back with, hey, you're talking about a God that is omniscient, that knows everything, right? So you're going to say, hey, I think maybe I'll just go ahead and, go ahead and say, hey, I think I believe in this God, and that'll get me through. And I reposted back to him, hey, what if it's the Christian God? And you can't just say, I believe in God. You have to say, I believe in Jesus, and I have to have Jesus in my heart and all that. And I said, and then Pascal's wager falls apart completely. And I just wanted to get you guys' take on all that.
There are indeed a number of issues with Pascal's wager. One, the idea that you can just choose your belief based on what the benefits would be, that you could just sit there and say, it would be better if I were to believe this, therefore I believe it. Can you actually flip your brain to do that? Not really. And if the Almighty is supposed to be judging us based on our beliefs, probably knows what we actually think. So if we just say, oh, you are so mighty, I praise you, can I get past the pearly gates? In theory, this God is smarter than that. So the whole idea that we could just switch our beliefs to whatever is allegedly beneficial is already kind of absurd. But even if that psychological issue weren't in the way, probably to me the biggest objection is, the many gods objection with Pascal's wager, because it's not a binary choice. It's not God versus no God. It's no God versus a pantheon of possibilities. And if in every single case, if you choose wrong, you get infinite punishment. Well, your chances of picking right are basically zero.
What if I choose Allah?
If you choose,
and I made a mistake. Yeah. Oh, I took Jesus, turned out to be Allah.
Yeah. Or it could have been Odin, or it could have been of some god you've never heard of, or it could be the case that it is the Christian God, but with one difference, is that he only wants you to come and believe because you have done rigorous research, not because you willed yourself to believe. And now, by accepting the wager like that, you actually have condemned yourself to hell. You have to basically assume a whole bunch of things for this wager to work and ignore every other possibility. And that binary choice that Blaise Pascal came up with is just horribly faulty. Once you see it's not a binary, it's not a trinary, it's an infinity of possibilities. Your chances of picking right is basically zero. So what should you do instead? Go where the evidence actually follows.
Right, and that's what I was saying. But I was like, if there was a God, and he was omniscient, and he knew your thoughts, he would know that you were taking this choice just to save your ass, basically.
Yeah.
So,
And again,
anyway,
it depends on the
God. You get a lot of people
only wants his ass to be kicked. If the Almighty only wants ass kickers, then you could be getting in. But if he wants actual, truly in their heart, devout people, then you'd get excluded. So I guess it depends. Does God want true believers, or does he just want smoke blown up his almighty tuchus?
Well, I'm kind of glad I don't believe in him, so I passed that. But I just thought it was something funny that popped up on my Facebook page. But anyway, you guys have a great evening.
Thanks, Bill. By the way, you, Bill, and anybody else can run over to my YouTube channel, sans.deity. I'm there under Matt Dillahunty. You can go to patreon.com/atheist debates. The very first video that I ever did was like a 30-minute dissertation on Pascal's wager, along with a lot of graphics and other work. And when I got it done, the patrons were like, that's cool and all. We're glad you put all this work into it, but it's actually more fun for us when you just like look into the camera and talk than when you do all this graphs and charts, pictures and stuff. The important thing to remember is that Blaise Pascal was a mathematician, and he knowingly was only comparing a particular Christian model to disbelief of that model. He knew and understood that his model didn't cover the entire potential pantheon of gods, But there's so much more wrong with Pascal's wager, because if you read what Pascal actually said, he understood that belief is not a choice. And he understood that this argument would seem to be flawed because it's advocating for you to choose a belief which he acknowledged was not possible, or he did not believe was possible. And in response to that, he wrote that either the case that he's made will compel you, not that you'll make the choice, but that you will be convinced, or that you should keep acting as if you believe and hope that you wind up deceiving yourself into belief. This is the extent to which Pascal went for an incredibly flawed argument that was incomplete and made all kinds of flawed assumptions, even under the very discrete model that he was advocating, including stuff, Aaron was talking about, can you fool God? And is merely professing a belief as good as actually having a belief? And, once the video is through and points out all the problems with Pascal's wager, it is one of those things. By the way, that's the last call of the day for this episode of the show. But Pascal's wager is one of the things that I addressed it first on my channel when I finally went live with the Patreon, even though I had done other videos on other subjects prior, because it came up over and over again. And it was just exhausting to have people call in and say, yeah, but what if you're wrong? And think that they had said something profound. And I get it, because when I was still a believer, there's something in your mindset once you are convinced of something, especially when we're talking about religious belief and you're surrounded by other people and you have your reasons, where if anybody comes forward and gives a suggestion that what you believe might be wrong or unwarranted, there's an instant resistance to this. And I'm not just talking about religion. If your perception about the world is X and somebody comes up and says, that's not true and here's why, or that hasn't been demonstrated and here's why, or what needs it, the instant reaction for most people is resistance. I don't know what's wrong with your argument, but there has to be something wrong with your argument, because it would lead to this thing, which is not what I know to be true. You go back to callers earlier, once they're convinced of it, they'll start using the knowledge label. We don't even have to get into a discussion about belief and knowledge and everything else. All they're doing is expressing a confidence. So when I'm confident about something, there's now a hurdle, a mental hurdle in my head, because I'm the one that's convinced, that you have to overcome. That's not the way it should be. That's not the way the burden of proof should work. That we should have to convince people there are people who think the earth is flat. And they're getting ready to have the final experiment where they're going to go down to the South Pole in December and film the sun, not setting. And they're going to take a bunch of flat earthers down there. It doesn't fit with any of those models. And they're calling it the final experiment. And that means that 2024 will be the last year we ever have to hear about flat earth stuff, except that we all know that's not what's going to happen. We all know that in 2025, there's going to be gross rationalizations and conspiracy theories and other things to try to show why the final experiment was a failure. Now, that is assuming we get down there and see what us globists expect. If we get down there and the observations don't match the globe model, the world will not, the scientists are not going to go after the flat earthers. You faked the experiments and you did. No. This is going to be worldview altering. There will be scientific papers written about it, and we will be exploring how this data that contradicts the fundamental model of a helios or a heliocentric universe with an oblate spheroid as an Earth. How does that make any sense? What did we get wrong? Why does it seem to work for every calculation and every observation, right until we go down to the South Pole and then it will turn the world on its ear. I don't think it's going to happen. Matter of fact, I find it a little bit offensive that we're even doing this particular experiment, considering how many other experiments already demonstrate the shape of the Earth pretty damn conclusively, not the least of which is, that the flat earthers have to throw out gravity and they have to pretend that we didn't go to the moon, which we can see the evidence of us having been to the moon with telescopes. It's just absolutely wild. All right, last little set of announcements here. And that is
before you do that,
all the shows and stuff. What's that?
Quick thing. The video that you did on Pascal's wager, did you get into Pascal's mugging?
I don't think so. This was 13 years ago, so I can't tell you exactly what's in the video.
Okay. Just because I like that as well, because it kind of also shows there's something underlying the logic that shows if you accepted it, oh boy, would you allow yourself to basically be duped and destroyed pretty easily by any nefarious person, just by making the claim of what they'll give you as a reward big enough to eventually make you say, oh yeah, I'm doing the game theoretic stuff, and saying, okay, I'll let you, take my wallet or anything else. And also to be self-serving, it's a part of the book that Jonathan Pierce and I wrote about aliens and religion, literally called Aliens and Religion Where Two Worlds Collide. We talk a little bit about Pascal's mugging in terms of, do we need to protect ourselves from the aliens that might be out there to get us? So for the sake of self-promotion, Pascal's mugging, give me $10 to talk more about it.
There you go. We're not doing super chats today. We don't tend to do that on the Sunday show, but by all means, look that up. Because what I know that I went into was the various notion of, if we're going to talk about afterlife, which is essentially what Pascal's kind of arguing for, the afterlife, you have to consider, which heaven should I seek and which hell should I seek to avoid? And which one of those two do I prioritize? Do I spend my time trying to seek the best heaven, irrespective of which one may be true, or do I spend my time trying to avoid the worst hell? And what Aaron's talking about with the potential, we'll just give you two heavens to alternate, between. They'll both be wonderful places, and you can move back and forth between them with no hope of getting bored. So isn't two heavens definitely better than one heaven? Therefore, you should join my religion. Or our hell is even worse than the Christian hell, because not only does it last forever and you're going to have these things and this suffering, but we're going to add in this and this and this. And then we're going to, every time you think, it can't hurt me anymore because I've gotten used to it, we're just going to wipe your mind and start all over from the beginning. And you won't even know why you're being tormented or tortured. How awful is that? And by the way, just keep adding stuff to it. It's, I'm going to have to go get the book and check out the potential of what aliens are doing. On that note, first of all, a huge thank you to everybody tuning in and to the callers. I wish we'd have gotten a couple of more theistic callers that didn't, give up or have a really kind of esoteric take on things. But thanks to our call screener and our moderators, and to Arden, who's producing down the hall. We're going to go get some food, and then we will be back in 2 hours with myself and Paulogia for the Sunday show After Dark. Huge thank you to Aaron, and always enjoy doing the show with you. And the rest of you, stay away from the conspiracy water fountain. Try to keep yourself moored and grounded, and wait for evidence sufficient to reaching a conclusion before you reach a conclusion or publicly express the conclusion you think you're leaning to. We've got a lot of work to do.